We're not quite ready to start, but can I encourage those of you who are objectors, please take a seat in this room. But if you are not an objector but simply an observer, I sense that we might actually run out of chairs. So, Brian, are all those who wish to speak as objectors in the room now?
As far as I'm aware, we've got everyone.
Right, okay. Good evening, everyone. I think we'll start now. So first of all, welcome everyone to the Planning Committee. But before we start the meeting, I have a few housekeeping announcements to make. There will be no planned fire alarm test today, and if you hear the fire alarm, please leave by the nearest fire exit and make your way to the agreed assembly point, which is the St John's Churchyard off Jewett Street. Council assembly staff will be available to direct you as required. The public toilets are located off the main reception area as you came in. Now, this meeting is being live streamed and will be available on the Council's YouTube channel after the end of the live stream. If you do not want to be captured in the live stream, please sit in the two back rows of this room or make your way to the atrium where there's a live feed set up, but no streaming takes place. In terms of the seating arrangement, can I ask those who wish to speak in objection to the application sit in the first front rows, unless you don't want to be captured on the live stream, in which case please sit in the last two rows. Those who would like to film, audio record, photograph or tweet the public proceedings, I would ask you to sit in the second and third row in the seats with green reserve signs. Please do not film or photograph the audience and focus on the top table where the councillors and officers sit. Please be considerate towards other people in the room and take care not to disturb the proceeding. I repeat, if you are filming the meeting, please do not film your fellow audience members, as there are people who have expressly asked not to be filmed. If you do, I may ask you to leave the meeting room. There are copies of the Council protocol for reporting and filming posted on the walls around this room. Can I remind all attendees, and especially the speakers, that those proceedings will be recorded, and so caution them against making any defamatory statements. The code for accessing the Council's Wi-Fi is visible on the screen behind me, I believe.
It is.
There you are this time. There you are. Okay. During the meeting, members of the committee will not access the internet except as it relates to the official business of the meeting, send or receive emails, text messages, or tweets concerning the business of the committee. As you would have all seen in the documents and on the council website, in view of the scale of the development being considered and the level of interest, we've made small changes to the way today's application will be heard. The meeting will be held over 2 sessions, today and next Monday, the 30th of September. The time allocated for presentations from objectors, the applicant, supporters and ward councillors will be extended to 5 minutes instead of the usual 3 minutes. A presentation from presenters of the application living within 250 metres of the proposal site will be allowed instead of the usual 100 metres. Today, we expect to hear from only the presentations by the planning officers and by the objectors. Both of these will be followed by questions from the committee. The remaining presentation will be heard on the second session on the 30th of September. I hope that's understood by everyone. Good, good, okay. I will now begin the meeting formally. First of all, apologies. There are no apologies. You've got a full house, thank you. Second item is confirmation of voting members. Can I ask all voting members to show of hands, please? Thank you. A notification of any item of business which the chair deems urgent. The following additional documents have been circulated at the meeting. Addendum report, members should have. A members pack. And is there a supplemental, I wonder? That's fine. That's very good, very good. Item 4, disclosure of interest and dispensation. Does any member wish to declare any interest or dispensation in respect of any item or issue to be considered at this meeting? Are there any declarations?
No, Chair.
Very good, thank you very much. Now, going to item 5, which is the development management. The next item of business concerns the determination of planning application. I would like to remind everyone of the committee's guidance on the code of conduct of business. Officers will present the report, outline their recommendations and answer questions raised by the committee. If present or wishing to speak, the following may then address the committee for no more than 5 minutes each. For this session, it will be the spokesperson representing any objectors to the application. And by now, I believe we now have a single spokesperson, and if there are more than one objector wishing to speak, the time will be divided accordingly within the 5-minute time slot. Speakers should really restrict their comments to the planning aspect of the proposal, should avoid repeating information which is already in the report. The meeting is not a hearing where all participants present evidence to be cross-examined by other participants. At the end of each presentation, the committee may ask questions of the presenter. Speakers should lead the committee onto subject which they would welcome further questioning. After receiving all submissions, the committee will then debate the application and consider the recommendations. This is a council committee meeting which is open to the public, and there should be no interruptions from the audience. And finally, I would like everyone present to know that although the planning committee comprises of members of different political parties, we are not politically whipped. Our decisions are made in accordance with the council's planning policy and based upon the information contained in the relevant reports, together with the consultation responses and any forwardable submissions made today. How we approach these applications is set out in the Development Management Report at item 5, and if members are happy to note that report, we'll then move on to considering the planning applications. Are you content? Thank you very much. I'll now proceed. Item 5.1, line bounded by Lower Road, Redrick Road, Quebec Way and Surrey Quays Road, and site at Robert Close, SE16. And members, this is pages 5 to 271 of the agenda pack, and the relevant pages within the addendum report. Can I ask the officer considering the report to introduce himself and make your presentation?
Thank you, Chair. My name is Yvonne Lewis. I'm the Strategic Applications Team Manager at Southwark. So I will be beginning the presentation, but I have quite a lot of colleagues here with me today who will be also contributing. Mike Glasgow was the case officer for the scheme. Michael Takaris will be speaking specifically on design and heritage. Sally Crew, our transport manager, speaking on the transport impacts. And we also have two external people on our table today. We have Anne Crane from TfL, Strategic Transport Authority, and Anthony Lee, who is the Council's appointed expert on viability for this case. Thank you. This application is an unusually large application. It has the capacity to completely transform the Canada Water town centre. It's unusual to have a site with a single ownership over such a large area. It's 21 hectares or 53 acres, and the ability to bring forward a truly comprehensive development. As you can see from the site plan, it includes 3 main sites: the shopping centre, the leisure park and the print works, each with their large surface car parks. It also has 3 smaller sites: the land on Roberts Close, the former police station on Lower Road and the Dockmaster's office courtyard. And the application also includes part of the Canada Water dock water body, which is so important in defining the character of the area. This part of Canada Water is very different to the outer parts of the peninsula, but as the main town centre for Rotherhithe and Bermondsey, it has many shortcomings. Although it has the main shopping centre and the important Tesco superstore, the range of shops, and particularly the opportunities for cultural life and for eating and drinking, are very limited. It does not make the most of the key asset of the dock environment. The large format big box buildings and car parks make it difficult to move across the site on foot, pushing movement out onto the longer routes around the peripheral roads. The impermeability and limited range of retail is recognised in the Canada Water AAP. I'm just moving forward a couple of slides. The main aim of the AAP is to create an accessible, distinctive and vibrant major town centre at Canada Water. And I put on screen the themes from the AAP. So in terms of shopping, this application would respond by providing a new food store, earmarked for Tesco, to allow continuity of trading and a much improved mix of retail units focused around a new high street and a network of streets known as the Cuts. In relation to transport and improved connections, it has a new entrance to Surrey Quay Station, improvements to the flow and operation of the Canada Water Station, contributions to new bus services and reduced town centre car parking and minimal residential car parking, together with an extension of the London Cycle Hire scheme. In relation to leisure, it has an increased quantum of leisure floor space, a replacement cinema, provision for a replacement bingo hall if sought by an operator, lots of opportunities for restaurants and cafes and bars, and importantly, a new public leisure centre in phase 1. In relation to places, it has a new network of attractive pedestrian and cycle priority streets, linking the new neighbourhoods with the surrounding area, including new links to Lower Road and new public spaces, including a 1.4 hectare park, and works to improve the dock. In relation to housing, it would provide between 2,000 and 4,000 high quality new homes, of which 35% of which would be affordable, and with the potential for new elderly persons sheltered housing or other specialist housing alongside that. And in relation to community, it could provide enhanced social and economic opportunities, up to 30,000 new jobs, plus jobs in the 15-year construction programme, with training and employment opportunities safeguarded for local people, affordable retail and workspace suitable for startups, plus the potential for 16+ education, community space, health centre and ongoing support for social and voluntary organisations. The Canada Water AAP is one of the key parts of the development plan for this area, and has several designations which are up on the screen at the moment. I won't read them, but just to say that the range of uses as required by the AAP is largely reflected in the application you have before you. In relation to the broader development plan, these are some of the targets which have been included in the subsequent documents. You'll see that there have been a number of documents which have been revised and updated over the years, with higher targets as time moves on, reflecting the strategic importance of this site. And in terms of some of the key designations in the plan, they are on the screen. Just to note that it's not in a conservation area, it has no listed buildings on the site. It is, as I've said, part of the Canada Water core area. It's an opportunity area, it's designated under the London plan. It's a town centre, it's designated to become a major town centre. It's a GLA designated housing zone, and the Canada Water dock is metropolitan open land and a site of interest for nature conservation. In terms of the process, officers have been working with British Land for over 5 years to bring forward this application. The team were initially just looking at the shopping centre, but subsequently the leisure park and the printworks were added when BL acquired an interest in them, and the master plan has evolved to take in this wider scope. Departments and specialisms across the council have been involved in this process: leisure, public health or the clinical commissioning group, education, transport, culture, economic development, environment, ecology, and many more. It's been a truly corporate approach to securing the best development for Canada Water. And there's also been a range of statutory consultees, including Historic England, Sport England, and the Met Police, and obviously the GLA as the strategic planning body for London. And my colleague Michael Glasgow will talk a bit more about consultation responses just a little bit later on. And just to note that the Council has entered a Master Development Agreement with British Land, which was signed in May 2018, which reflects the Council's freehold interest in the shopping centre and the printworks sites. British Land has a long leasehold interest, very long leasehold interest in both of these sites. And the Master Development Agreement would establish the financial relationship between British Land and the Council going forward, effectively giving the Council a 20% interest in the site. I'll talk briefly about local engagement. It comes up again a little bit later, but just to say that as well as working with the Council, BL have been very actively working with the local community in Rotherhithe, and the just listed on the screen are some of the activities that they've been doing. They've held 120 events, had a huge mailing list, they had a specialist website, and they've been regular attendees at some of the forums, things like Tenants Residents Association meetings in the area, and they've invested heavily in supporting local projects and local charities. In terms of the format of the application, given the size of the site and the length of the time over which it would be built out, British Land have submitted what's called a hybrid planning application. This means that full details are provided for the first phase, which is made up of plot A1, A2 and K1, and also the interim petrol filling station, and outline planning permission for the remainder of the site. This means matters such as access, layout and appearance for those future phases of development are reserved and would be submitted to the Council subsequently as reserved matters applications over future years as each plot or zone comes forward for development. The outline nature of much of the development scheme gives resilience to the scheme, enabling it to respond to changes in market conditions over time or to respond to the needs of a potential occupier who may bring something special to the area. The GLA have supported this approach, which they conclude would make the scheme more deliverable. The manner in which the outline zones are built out will be controlled by 3 core documents: the development specification, which controls the amount and location of each land use, the parameter plan, which establishes the block structure and the scale of buildings, and the design guidelines, which set rules and guidance to ensure quality is maintained throughout the long development period. And I think Michael will talk a little bit more about that later as well. So in brief, because these elements were picked up again in different parts of the presentation, the master plan sets out to establish a network of streets and spaces which should be the long-term legacy of this project. These routes create focal points within the area and linkages to the surrounding neighbourhoods. The development plots are structured within this street network and with the range of heights responding to the context and to the focal points created. The land uses are distributed with some flexibility across the site, but with a concentration of retail uses along the high street and the cuts, and the large food store on Zone G, and employment at the heart of the area and on the high street and potentially at the printworks, and a more residential focus towards the south and the east. And I'm just going to hand over to my colleague Michael Glasgow at that point.
Please. Thank you, Yvonne. So it falls to me just to talk you through some of the more detailed aspects of the application before you this evening. As Yvonne explained, this is a hybrid application whereby 4 plots are presented this evening in detail, with the remainder of the site in outline only. So in terms of the first phase, comprises the plots that you can see on the map on the screen at the moment. Plots A1 and A2 are located at the junction of Deal Porters Way and Surrey Quays Road, just close to Canada Water Library. Plot K1 is located at the opposite end of the site, just off Roberts Close, and the interim petrol filling station will be located in the other corner of the site, roughly at the junctions of Lower Road and Redriff Road. Collectively, these plots will deliver 265 new homes in a policy-compliant tenure split, and a policy-compliant mix of dwelling sizes, 38,000 square metres of new workspace, and just under 2,000 square metres of retail, alongside the new leisure centre that Yvonne mentioned. So, taking each plot in turn, plot A1 is a mixed-use plot. It contains a prominent residential tower rising to up to 34 stories. It includes 186 flats, principally private dwellings, with a handful of intermediate units as well. The tower is surrounded by a lower 6-storey building, which will comprise the retail floor space at ground level and workspace above. The plot sits at the top of what would become the new high street, and so the opportunity to generate a number of active frontages is taken on all sides of the plot. The plot is entirely car-free, and in terms of its other transport and servicing requirements, it includes an internal servicing yard to take the servicing activity off the high street, and a large basement that would contain dedicated cycle stores both for the workspace employees and for residents. Here are some layout plans just to sort of demonstrate how that works in sections. So at ground floor level, there'd be a shared atrium with the workspace and residential lobbies, and the servicing yard in the bottom left corner of the top left image there. And then the other plans, which I won't go into in much detail, just show the floor plates as you proceed up the tower. Next slide. Plot A2 sits adjacent to plot A1. This building will contain the new council leisure centre at the ground floor and basement levels. The building has been designed, or at least the leisure centre component of the building has been designed in accordance with a brief issued by the council's Parks and Leisure Services, and the new leisure centre would reflect Sporting England guidelines. It would contain an 8-lane, 25-metre pool, a separate learner pool, a four-court sports hall, fitness suites, and a gym. Much like the neighbouring A1 building, this plot includes retail along the high street frontages and would include significant amounts of new workspace above, which you can see in the cross-section on the next slide. The building has been designed with a distinctive sawtooth ridge roofline, which aims to reflect the area's industrial past. Its principal frontage is facing onto Canada Dock, and a series of terraces would be arranged on this frontage. Other elevations are much more sensitive, given the proximity to neighbouring residential buildings, and the rear of the building is purposefully stepped and includes permanent planters to reduce the prospect of overlooking to Hoffield Place. And that image is included in the committee report. As with A1, a servicing yard is integrated within the ground floor of the building. Long stay cycle parking is provided within the building for workspace employees, and a series of short stay cycle parking spaces are provided for visitors to the leisure centre. Now, the two plots are really conceived as a pair, and in addition to the new hard landscaping that will be immediately surrounding the two buildings, their delivery would coincide with some significant investment in the public realm at the top of Deal Porters Way. Principally, this includes a new landscape public square on the site of the current dock office car park, which I think is on the last slide. A new public route that will link the High Street to Lower Road, and a new planting regime along the western edge of Canada Water Dock. Skip forward a few. One more. Thanks. So the third building presented this evening in detail is plot K1. This is located just off Roberts Close and comprises a part 5, part 6-storey residential building. It's 100% affordable with a mixture of social rented and intermediate units. As you can tell by the images on the screen, the building is primarily brick built with metal detailing, and the tone of the brick has been revised during the determination period to respond to initial feedback. Access to these properties will be from a series of internal decks which will run around the perimeter of the courtyard, and this does mean that every one of the properties is able to achieve a dual or triple aspect. The cycle storage for this plot is divided by 2 stores within the body of the building and a 3rd store in the courtyard. A bit more detail about those is given in the officer report. An external plant room would be located just to the bottom of the image on the screen now, and both that building and the external cycle parking area would be topped with green roofs. The plot has 4 dedicated disabled car parking bays, which you can see just adjacent to the plant building there. And it's worth noting that the site has a particularly sensitive context, given that it sits immediately adjacent to Claremont House on the left of the image on the screen, which is a recently completed residential scheme. Alfred Salter School is to the top of the image on the screen. And to the right-hand side, you would see the Church of Our Lady of the Immaculate Conception. To the south of the image, to the bottom of the image rather, is the entrance to Russia Woodland and Stavehill Ecological Park, which is a designated site of importance for nature conservation and the local nature reserve. Next one. The final plot, which is presented in detail this evening, is the interim petrol filling station. It will be an 8-pump petrol station to replace the current Tesco facility that was located on the site of A2. In terms of design, it follows a fairly typical approach with the pumps topped with a lightweight canopy and with a retail kiosk. But the interim part of the interim petrol filling station refers to the fact that the structural columns that will be installed would enable the future development of this zone to effectively wrap around the petrol station, which means that it might not necessarily need to be relocated in the future. The only other things to note on the petrol station are that the heavily treed embankment just at the bottom of the image on the screen on the Redriff Road boundary would largely be retained when the petrol station is delivered. Overall, these parts of the site have been selected as the first phase of development for practical reasons, partly. They all would take place on parts of the site that are currently unencumbered by existing buildings, and their development would largely allow the existing shopping centre and leisure park to continue to trade with limited disruption. But collectively, I think the plots contain a range of uses that are appropriate and a fitting start for the master plan, which does aim to deliver a truly mixed-use town centre alongside substantial investments in the public realm. It truly would generate a transformation of the town centre as we currently know it, as Yvonne mentioned. Officers are satisfied that the buildings presented in the first phase would set a high benchmark in design and quality and could be described as exemplary. I think Michael will say a little bit more about that a bit later on in the presentation. But as Yvonne mentioned, so I won't labour this point too much, the detailed proposals only occupy a small proportion of the site. The majority of the application is presented in outline only. And that means that for the majority of the sites, it's been notionally divided into a series of development zones, but the reserve matters of access, appearance, landscaping, layout and scale would all be determined at a later stage in reserve matters applications. They'll be subject to the same level of scrutiny as this application, they'll be subject to the same level of consultation, and could ultimately all be returned to a planning committee for further decisions if need be. Yvonne mentioned some of the control documents that the outline element will be subject to. They're listed on the screen there. And so I won't repeat that too much, aside to say that the parameter plans really establish a building envelope. They dictate the building lines for the individual zones and the maximum heights. If we can click on to the next slide. And again. And again. The development specification, which would govern the land uses in the outline components, effectively establishes a menu of land uses for each of those zones. So when reserve master applications were submitted to the council, the applicant would have a choice at any given point in time. Within the flexibility allowed by the development specification to select the land uses they think are appropriate for a zone or plot. There's not complete freedom. Within each zone, the development specification would set out floor space limits, so we have an idea about the amount of space that could come forward in any zone. And there's an overall cap as well in terms of the amount of floor space that could be delivered across the scheme in its entirety. Next one. The third of the control documents are the design guidelines. There are 2 volumes of this. There's the design guidelines covering the development zones and design guidelines covering the public realm. And in the absence of detailed design, the role of these 2 documents really is to set the general design rules and principles that architects in the future will need to interpret when creating their designs. Now, with so much of the site being an outline, the applicant has devised what they've termed the illustrative master plan. This is, in effect, their sort of reasoned interpretation of how those various control documents could be interpreted to deliver a scheme. The model that is around here somewhere, I believe, depicts this master plan. And this has been used to sort of demonstrate to officers, to the general public, and I think to the applicant team themselves, how the scheme might be realised. It's also the foundation of the financial viability appraisal, but it is only one interpretation of how the scheme may be delivered. So we've just put together a couple of slides to give you an impression of how those documents would work in tandem to ultimately deliver one of the future plots. So there's an example on the screen there of Zone J, which is trying to highlight the range of land uses, the parameter plans for the building lines and the heights, and then the image in the bottom right-hand corner of that slide effectively is what that zone could look like if all of those rules were interpreted at the same time. So what you can see is that the outline element really presents a building envelope which would never be achieved once these codes and specifications were taken into account. Now, given the scale of the development, the environmental impact assessment regulations require a very detailed forensic examination of the environmental effects of the scheme. Early in 2018, the Council was formally asked for its opinion as to what this assessment should comprise, and an environmental statement has since been prepared in accordance with that opinion. The bullet points on the screen there identify the various chapters and topics that the environmental statement addresses. The methodology between the chapters tends to differ, but broadly speaking, the role of the environmental statement is to identify the potential significance of the environmental impacts on a range of sensitive receptors. So that includes residential neighbours or open spaces or things like air quality. Given the sort of level of technical expertise required to put this document together, the Council have employed consultants, land use consultants, to undertake their own independent review of this document, and their findings have influenced the way in which the various chapters of the report are presented in the committee report before you. Members should be advised that the regulations require that the Planning Committee takes note of the environmental effects described in the report when making their decision this evening, or on Monday. In terms of consultation, there's quite a comprehensive summary in the officer report, but I'll very quickly go over some of the key themes. At the time of writing, there were 288 responses to the application that have reached us over a series of different periods of consultation over the last 18 months. Those responses collectively have raised around 1,000 different points, so it has been a significant public response to the application. Members will note that in the addendum report that was circulated earlier today, we have received a further 25 responses since the report was drafted, and I've tried to give an overview of what some of those responses entail in the addendum reports. Figure 14 in the report, or the pie chart on the screen, tries to demonstrate in broad terms the topics that have been most consistently referenced in the consultation responses. There was a reasonable split, I think about 60-40, between comments submitted in relation to the master plan and those submitted in response to the detailed plots. I think it's fair to say that the comments we received in support are generally supportive of the opportunity to deliver a substantial development at Canada Water, the opportunity to improve the town centre offer and deliver a large number of homes. Whereas the objections have tended to focus either on concerns around the local capacity of infrastructure to withhold this scale development, and that relates to public transport, the highway, or things like schools and GP practices, or very specific responses in relation to the detailed plots, and they've tended to focus on things like building heights or potential impacts on neighbour amenity. Daylight and sunlight responses and overshadowing concerns have featured very heavily in that regard. I think it's important to note as well that we've had quite a comprehensive range of responses from statutory consultees, and both the GLA and Transport for London are very supportive of the proposal before you this evening. Changes in some of the building heights were secured early on in the process in response to concerns raised by Historic England. They have since confirmed that the changes secured through the dissemination process are satisfactory, and I think that Michael might say a little bit more about that later.
Thank you. I'm just going to comment again on some of the land uses and some of the issues that have been raised by the application, either through consultation or by the environmental statement. As we said earlier, the expectations and ambitions for Canada Water Town Centre have grown in the various iterations of the development plan documents, and in the draft New London Plan, which is the most recent document, which recently concluded its examination in public, that proposes this to be a major town centre with an anticipated 5,000 new homes and 20,000 new jobs. And this ambitious target reflects the view of Canada Water as a strategic area for regeneration, and it also reflects the challenging housing targets for the borough as a whole and Canada Water's role in meeting these delivery targets. As an opportunity area with an excellent public transport accessibility level for its central area, it's a place where we need to optimise the use of brownfield land. The report comments on the density of the scheme, both in terms of the first phase and the outline zones, where flexibility means that the effective density could cover a wide spectrum. The development plan is clear that density can be exceeded where excellent design means that the potential impacts of high density living can be overcome. And the report also refers to the approach in the emerging London Plan and New Southwark Plan, where the numeric density ranges are no longer applied in the same way, but instead the expectation is that the delivery of housing is optimised through good design. The report sets out how excellence will be secured and where there are impacts, how these are mitigated, and ultimately balanced with other factors such as the needs for homes and jobs. In terms of retail, the aim of the AAP, as I said earlier, is to create a genuine town centre with a more diverse range of shops and services. Recent retail studies identify a need for more growth in retail to account for a forecast population growth. This would enable Southwark to hold more of the retail spending in the borough, as well as creating a destination centre at Canada Water. Retail could be provided on most of the zones within the master plan, but is focused on the new high street linking Canada Water and Surrey Quays stations and onwards towards the established shops on Lower Road. And this high street is where the national chains are likely to be located, with the more intimate retail environment within the cuts south of the dock, better suited to smaller or independent traders. And what you're seeing on screen is an image of a potential how the cuts area could potentially look. The other key retail provision is the large format food store on Zone G, which is earmarked as the replacement store for Tesco. This location would enable the new store to be open before the existing is demolished, allowing Tesco to have continuity of trading through the development process and maintaining the service for customers. You will see from the addendum report the late objection made by Tesco, where they raised various concerns about the location and design of the store, as well as other comments on the wider retail strategy. They also comment on the status of their commercial negotiations with British Land. The location of the main food store on Zone G has been within the master plan for at least 2 years, I think quite a bit longer than that, and Tesco has not previously raised any concerns with the council about that site. It has 2 major road frontages, and the car park and service area which it requires can be accessed directly off the main road network. It has good visibility from the other retail streets and easy links to bus stops and the 2 stations. The outcome of the commercial negotiations between BL and Tesco are not a material planning consideration, but the permission would facilitate the delivery of a large format food store within the town centre as part of the town centre shopping mix. BL have committed to providing 10% of the illustrative master plan quantum of retail floor space as affordable retail. And just note the correction in the addendum that the term for any individual unit is 10 years rather than 15 years, as in the main report. But given the length of the build programme, this does mean that affordable units will continue to be available for a long period as each phase comes on stream. Given the lack of an adopted policy to require affordable retail space, this is a positive contribution to the diversity of the retail offer and could include not just shops, but also kiosks or stalls for micro or startup businesses. The development would also provide 10% of retail space as small shops, these could overlap with the retail space, but could also take account of more established retailers who trade from smaller niche premises, again supporting the diversity of the retail environment. The existing shops on site, I'll just skip too fast. The existing shops on site are mainly national multiples such as Clark's Shoes, Starbucks, Superdrug, but also does include a few independent traders. And British have submitted an existing business management strategy setting out how the existing retailers have been informed about the plans and the advice and assistance offered in terms of their relocation. And the advantage of a long-term phased build-out programme is that there will be no wholesale and single demolition. Retailers can be given the opportunity to locate to new premises as they come on stream. In terms of employment, the aim is to create a business cluster. BL are confident that the inherent advantages of Canada Water in terms of accessibility, the quality of the place that can be created around the dock, and the open spaces and green environment will be highly attractive to firms across the business spectrum. This ambition was supported by the GLA. There is a commitment to deliver at least 83,000 square metres of Class B1 or workspace across the scheme, and more than meeting the requirement of the AAP. If BL were to opt to deliver the more commercially focused option within the flexibility of the application, then they could deliver up to a maximum of over 300,000 square metres of B1 floor space across the entire scheme. The illustrative master plan plots a kind of midpoint, which would create space for around 20,000 new jobs. Some of these could be in the Printworks building, which the application would allow to either be retained and adapted or demolished, depending on market interest. The development would provide 10% of the quantum of floor space in the illustrative master plan as affordable workspace. This would be provided as two distinct products or types: discounted space either in the dock offices or elsewhere in the master plan at 70% of market rents for a 15-year period, and also co-working space available on flexible terms to defined sectors, including startups or those with cultural or social value. While this does not exactly align with the approach in the new Southwark plan, and would be short of the 10% if the maximum commercial floor space was to be delivered, it is a positive response to the draft policy and has the support of the Council's local economy team. As with the affordable retail space, it would provide a rolling availability of affordable space throughout and beyond the build programme. In relation to housing, as we've said earlier, optimising the delivery of new homes is a key priority across all of the development plan documents and also within the NPPF. In this scheme, the first phase would deliver 265 new homes, as Michael said, and overall BL have committed to a minimum of 2,000 homes across the development. If they opted for a more residentially focused development, the application would allow for around 4,000 homes across the site. And the illustrative master plan shows a development around 3,000 homes, broadly a midpoint between the maximum and minimum numbers. The housing in the first phase, as Michael said, demonstrates a commitment to building high quality housing with high proportions of dual aspect, and the design guidelines contain rules about the quality of design which add further weight to the existing policies. The first phase provides 35% affordable housing, mainly in plot K1, and British Land have made the commitment to provide a minimum of 35% affordable housing across the entire scheme. A viability appraisal was submitted with the application, has been scrutinised on behalf of the Council by our experts, BNPP, and we have Anthony at the end of the table if we need him. Given the degree of flexibility of the application and the illustrative master plan, it was the illustrative master plan used for the viability appraisal, which contains around 3,000 homes. On the basis of the illustrative master plan and using today's values, it was agreed that the scheme could not viably support 35% affordable housing. It was far short of that, even when the £39.1 million grant from the GLA was factored in. Recognising the importance of affordable housing to the Council, BL agreed to offer 35% affordable housing despite the shortfall in viability. The tenure split across the whole development for the affordable housing will be 25% social rent and 10% intermediate products, in line with the emerging New Southwark plan policy. And on the point about viability, the flexibility inherent in the outline gives British Land opportunities to add value, either by adjusting the range of uses in response to the market, by adjusting the timing and delivery, or by increasing quantums closer to the maximums permitted under the development specification. as a large developer, they can also take a long-term view in that the place-making qualities of the overall development will create values beyond those possible in the area to date. On that basis, they can balance the risk of a commitment significantly beyond what the scheme could currently support with a more optimistic view about the long-term potential of the development. Any permission will be subject to several review points, including close to the end of the project. This would enable rises in profitability to be captured as additional affordable housing up to a cap of 40%. These reviews would relate to the residential elements of the development only. The mix of flat sizes in phase 1 accords with the AAP. However, in recognition of the risks being borne by the applicant in relation to affordable housing, it is recommended that the requirement for 20% 3-bedroom plus homes be relaxed for some of the central zones which are more likely to be developed at a higher density or with towers, and to allow the developer to provide 10% of the units rather than the usual 5% as studios, although these would all have to be within the private sector and not as affordable housing. And the GLA supports a more flexible approach to housing mix on sites such as this. Oh, sorry, I skipped that, I should say. So just coming back to the 35% affordable housing, that would produce between 700 and 1,400 affordable homes across the site, depending on the total quantum of housing delivered. And just briefly, on other types of housing, the application would allow for the delivery of specialist housing likely to be targeted at older people and student housing if demand arises. And it also allows for the provision of hotels, which are an appropriate part of the town centre mix. And I'm now going to hand over to Sally to talk about transport. And Sally, if you want me to move through your slides.
I've only got the one slide, so it will be a quick movement. Excuse me. Southwark's movement plan sets the approach for this area, and that considers the mayoral priorities of active travel, healthy streets, Vision Zero, and the climate change crisis. As seen in the figure that you have in front of us, particularly the one on the left, Rotherhithe Station is located to the north of the site, Canada Water Station on the northern aspect, and Surrey Quay Station on the southern aspect. These stations provide access to the Jubilee Line and the London Overground. 8 bus services currently serve the existing shopping centre and the wider peninsula. To the west of the site, which is more evident on the diagram on the right-hand side, is Lower Road, which provides access to the Rotherhithe Tunnel, and which sees over 25,000 vehicular trips daily. There are only 3 access egress points to the peninsula: Surrey Quays Road, Redriff Road and Brunel Road. Therefore, the highway network is both heavily utilised and constrained. The council are currently consulting on a range of measures locally, including wider parking controls, changes to Low Road one-way system and the provision of cycle infrastructure. It's also worth noting that TfL are currently constructing Cycleway 4 on Jamaica Road with the ambition to connect into Greenwich. As set out in the report in paragraph 430 to 431, the applicant has undertaken a series of modelling. This has included a number of packages and is TfL compliant. The applicant has modelled a range of uses from maximum employment to maximum residential, and has also taken subsequent revisions to assess the illustrative master plan, particularly looking at the retail quantum, and to amend the trip generation to be in line with what's presented within the TA. This modelling approach considers public transport and highway impacts. We can see from this modelling that over 13,000 trips are anticipated in an average PM peak hour as a maximum, with the majority of these being active travel, particularly rail underground, walking and bus services. If we look at the application in respect to the areas of impact on TfL, there's been significant review of the modelling and negotiation, and a mitigation package has been agreed, which includes additional bus services, funding for works and management at Canada Water Station, contribution to improvements at Surrey Quay Station, and cycle hire provision on the peninsula. The challenge of public transport network capacity and its operation have been raised by a number of objectors. The issues raised include Jubilee Line capacity, queuing at Canada Water Station, the provision of bus services locally, and the level of service that they provide. This is being considered within the report, and TfL are present here tonight to answer any questions that may arise. The challenge for Southwark is as a highway authority, because we have to consider both how the new highway network and its impact will impact on the wider network. The transport identifies that a majority of the vehicular trips are related to the retail uses, and therefore a specific focus of that has been on the highway impact assessment, and specifically around the illustrative master plan. Most significantly is Deal Porters Way, which will form part of the public highway, and for context will be of similar dimensions to Lordship Lane. Bus services will operate along Deal Porters Way with a set of bus stops to be provided proximate to the town square, and these are expected to be heavily utilised. As set out earlier, walking routes will be provided particularly to Lower Road and throughout the site. The Streetscape Design Manual, the Council's policy for implementing those will be applied to ensure ongoing compliance. Public car parking will be reduced to 1,000 spaces and be provided in 2 areas, a basement under Zone E and a multi-storey car park in Zone G. As set out earlier, residential parking will be in compliance with car-free policies and providing only for blue badge parking. In support of the strategic modelling, local highway modelling has been undertaken, and what we see from the vehicular access to the sites, they are predominantly located on the southern aspect, particularly along Redriff Road, and this is where we see a majority of the impact. The level of demand on Redriff Road suggests that there'll be some rerouting to some of the roads that provide access on and off the peninsula, namely Surrey Quays Road and Brunel Road. This will impact both on the usage of those streets and the traffic that operate on it. The scheme, as it is delivered up to and including the illustrative master plan, and particularly the retail quantum, as I set out before, being 53,612 square metres, we monitored and managed through a series of initiatives identified through the management plans, alongside physical interventions as they're described in paragraph 537 to 538. The applicant seeks to increase the retail provision above that of the master plan level. Further assessment of the transport impact will need to be undertaken, and a mitigation approach agreed with the council. Objections relating to the highway impact have related to highway capacity, car parking and resulting environmental concerns, and these are discussed in the report.
So neighbour amenity, considerations of the impacts on neighbour amenity tend to focus on privacy and overlooking, noise, daylight and sunlight impacts, and potential harm arising during the demolition and construction process. And each of those issues have been addressed in the report, and each of those issues have figured very prominently in the consultation responses received from residents around Canada Water and Rotherhithe. Now, given the existing use of the site, I think it's important to acknowledge that any development of the sort of scale acknowledged in the Area Action Plan is going to transform the relationship between neighbours and the majority of the town centre. However, that doesn't mean that the opportunity to reduce these impacts shouldn't be sought and achieved where possible through a detailed design process. One of the changes that have been secured over the last 18 months or so has been to increase the setback of the A2 building from the properties on Hoffield Place. And that's the image that you can see on the screen there. Now, that's not necessarily to improve the daylight and sunlight impacts at those properties, but in the view of officers, it does have a meaningful improvement on the scale of the building relative to those properties and a sense of enclosure that might otherwise have arisen. Concerns about daylight, sunlight and overshadowing have been one of the most consistent messages that have come through the public consultation. And the daylight model that has been created by the applicant's consultancy is included on your screen there. I think it's fair to say that the majority of the concerns raised so far through the consultation have been in relation to the 3 detailed plots. We've had a considerable amount of correspondence with residents at the Claremont House, Alfred Salter School, and volunteers representing Rushdown Woodland and Stakeley Ecological Park on the particular impacts of K1. Similarly, in relation to plots A1 and A2, we've received objections from residents at Columbia Point, Orchard House, Hoffield Place, and other properties in the vicinity. One point that we've tried to emphasise in the report is that the daylight modelling, as you can see on the screen there, includes the detail plots because they're known to us. But for the majority of the site, the modelling includes the maximum building envelope because for the majority of the site, the composition of the buildings is not yet known. That does mean that as we move through the reserve matters process and when architects and British Land are interpreting the control documents that have been mentioned already, the scale of much of that outlying component would reduce, and it's possible that some of the daylight impacts, sunlight impacts and overshadowing currently presented and referenced in the report would also reduce. Just go on to the next page. In addition to the 3 tests that have been carried out in accordance with the methodology advocated by the Building Research Establishment, a transient overshadowing model has been presented showing how the shadows around the site would manifest themselves at different hours of the day and in different seasons. The images on the screen there give an indication of how that imagery works and potentially why some of the concerns have arisen in neighbouring properties. The issue to raise in terms of the overshadowing is, of course, that it's only temporary, and those images do need to be considered in context with the numerical results and the guidance advocated by the BRE. Yvonne mentioned at the start of the presentation that the ambition is to create a truly mixed-use town centre, and she summarised some of the other uses that will be delivered alongside homes, workspace and retail. Some of those uses are shown on the screen there, and it's worth saying that the Section 106 agreement would secure a mechanism for delivering additional capacity in local primary schools and in local health facilities, both of which have been raised as concerns for objectors. But we're confident now that we have an approach that could work if the scheme were to come forward, and one which is supported by colleagues in the school place planning team and by Southwark Clinical Commissioning Group. I think Yvonne mentioned that the application would secure a replacement cinema and the opportunity for further leisure floor space, particularly the bingo. In addition, the Section 106 agreement would secure a minimum provision of community floor space, potential police subject to demand arising and being identified by the Metropolitan Police, public toilets and drinking fountains. So the ambition really is to create a town centre with a variety of uses.
Thank you. The Canada Water Master Plan sets out, I will cover the urban design, detailed design, architectural design, as well as heritage impacts and some of the public realm and tree aspects of the application. The Canada Water Master Plan sets out to deliver a new town centre with a strong sense of place and protect the historic environment. It does this by developing an urban strategy that is built around its public realm, spaces and routes which are designed to be safe and easy to navigate. And this means that the master plan before you is designed from the ground up as an urban framework, starting from how the place is experienced at ground level and then defining the built environment that emerges from it. This new urban framework for Canada Water has emerged from a clear understanding of the area, not only its immediate context, but also the wider of Southwark, but also the wider London setting. The framework sets out an appropriate balance between allowing a degree of flexibility to respond to new ideas and circumstances, but with clear rules to ensure that the urban design and architectural quality are delivered adequately through height, sensitive introduction of height, massing, land use, etc. The master plan also includes tall buildings, and here the foundations were laid for it in the Canada Water AAP, which states that this is a location that's suitable for tall buildings. However, we, at the same time, in order to introduce height in a rational way, we've insisted that a clear narrative that governs the distribution of tall buildings in this location was set out from the outset. And in addition, we have to bear in mind that a large part of the shopping centre site falls beneath the protected viewing plane from one of London's strategic views from Greenwich, and as a consequence, introduction of height has been very carefully considered in the scheme that's before you tonight. There are no designated heritage assets as such within the application site, but there are others nearby, as you can see from this map, listed buildings and conservation areas. And also what we've taken into account is undesignated heritage assets, features that are maybe of local interest and not worthy in their own right of statutory designation. So the principles of the master plan have been described briefly before, but they are basically based around the new key routes, the new key routes, which are the Dealporter Way, the north-south connection between the stations, Canada Water and Surrey Quays, the east-west pedestrian spine, which extends across the site from Hawkstone Road across all the way to Russia Dock Woods, and then a diagonal route that links Salter Road, Redriff Road, back to the dock. I call this the sort of triangle of the master plan, which connects the dots across the master plan and gives it its form. This triangle is made stronger by three key nodes: the Canada Water Dock, the new park, and the new public square. And these are the anchors of the three of the triangle, and give the master plan its main structure. The design guidelines are set out to reinforce that structure and work around what are called three character areas. The three character areas are the town centre, which is the commercial heart, based around Dealporter's Way, and are shown on your page 45. The park neighbourhood, which is a more residential and neighbourly neighbourhood area, and the central cluster, which is the main sort of, has got a mix of commercial, residential, and other uses. So the design guidelines promote good urban design principles. In some cases, they prescribe what can and can't be done, and in others, they set out the general rules that future design should adhere to and are meant to be read together with the parameter plans and development specification. And officers are satisfied that the master plan, together with the design guidelines, conforms to the Council's policies on urban design and architectural design, and will deliver a high-quality urban framework for the Canada Water Town Centre. In terms of the detailed plots, the only thing I wanted to add in terms of plots A1 and A2 are, again, these plots A1 sets out to define the northern gateway to the master plan. It conforms entirely with the principles of the master plan, but has all this, all the key features of the master plan embedded in it. The new route up from Lower Road, and a new place around the new leisure centre, a clear, strong dock edge facing onto the Canada Water Dock, and a protection to the listed building next door, the Dockmaster's office, with its prominent clock tower, which is, so the height is introduced in a layered way to protect that historic asset. I won't say anything further about plot K1, and will answer any questions that you might have about it. Just about impact on the heritage, we've looked at very carefully about at all the impacts of the proposal on the heritage, and tested. 63 views were included in the townscape and visual impact assessment to test how the scheme will appear in views across from various locations in and around the borough, as well as on the other side of the river from Tower Hamlets. And but throughout pre-application and at the application stage, two very important views came out. The one is the view from London Bridge, which is which is on the screen at the moment, and is played out in its sort of sequence in your packs from page 47 through to page 50. And the key aspect, the key aspect about this view is that it includes one of the strategic views in the London View Management Framework, which is at the centre of the bridge, looking towards Tower Bridge and the Tower of London World Heritage Site. And here, we are satisfied that the scheme protects this view and protects the strategic assets and doesn't impede or affect the viewer's appreciation of these important strategic assets. However, at the northern end, there is some interaction between at the northern end of the bridge, where you're walking across the bridge. You do get some interaction between the towers, the new towers which will appear at Canada Water, and Tower Bridge. They sit within the frame, and adjustments have been made to make sure that the tallest buildings stay within that frame and do not interrupt it. The other view that became an important and shaping view for this whole master plan has been this view here from Greenwich, which includes additional guidance from within the London View Management Framework and a protected zone which protects the views, and in this instance it protects views which includes Tower Bridge in the foreground and St Paul's in the distance. A very characterful view and a very important London view. And what has been done here is to introduce height in a layered way, stepping away from the view so as not to cause harm to that view. The conclusion we've put before you is that in the main, and in all those, in the most of those 68 views, 63 views that were tested, there is no harm arising out of this scheme. Where there may be considered, there is some impact, is in that view, that one view from the northern end of London Bridge, where there is, it may be considered that there is an impact. And in that instance, we've concluded that the harm that is arising is on the lowest order of less than substantial, and that is an important level, which at which point the NPPF suggests and says and guides decision makers to take into account and to take into the balance of that level of harm against the public benefits arising from the scheme. And here we'll stress, obviously, I'm sure you'll be aware of those public benefits, including, which include the public realm, the new leisure centres, the new other facilities, the new links and infrastructure, the housing and the affordable housing, and the commercial benefits of this proposal. So we're saying to you that that any harm arising, and that may be that limited, on the lowest order of less than substantial harm, is more than outweighed by the public benefits of this scheme, and it isn't on a protected view of the London View Management Framework. As for trees and green infrastructure, the majority of the existing tree stock is of the same age that was originally planted by the LDDC in the master plan landscaping. It therefore provides a uniform size of canopy cover and a limited variety of tree sizes and species, and that is considered to be not entirely beneficial to the sustainable management and resilience of the place. The proposed tree planting and maintenance strategy provides a more balanced age, size and species distribution, and this is crucial in providing a robust tree population where a succession of specimens is required over time to include a variety of forms and species that tolerate likely stresses due to climate change. So the benchmark for the delivery of trees has been set by the existing tree canopy on the site and measured from the outset, and this has been designed to be replaced over the lifetime of the development and in the fullness of time over the ensuing decades to exceed the canopy that's there at the moment. Trees of the greatest value to amenity, including A-category plane trees on Redriff Road, are retained and protected throughout the development, and this ensures a degree of mature landscape can benefit residents and public realm from the beginning of the phased development. New planting is proposed both on and off-site, which aims to maximise and spread the positive contribution provided by the replacement canopy cover. And the proposal is designed to replace the existing canopy cover no later than 5 years after the last phase has been completed, and an obligation has been included to monitor its delivery over the lifetime of the development. Officers are satisfied that the diversity of proposed green infrastructure and tree canopy satisfies all the relevant policies, and including the draft policies in the Southwark Plan and the New London.
So on energy and climate change, obviously a very important issue given that the Council recently declared a climate change emergency. The applicants put forward a strategy that focuses on efficient building design and the installation of renewable energy technologies across the site in order to meet the carbon reduction targets set out in the London Plan. The strategy is heavily predicated on wider changes to the national grid as the government pursues its own agenda for decarbonisation of the grid. This effectively means that over time, projections are that electrical-based solutions will be much better from a carbon perspective than some of the current proposals that the committee might be more familiar with, such as gas-fired CHP. In this case, the chosen technology is primarily heat pumps, although some of the plots would also have supplementary photovoltaic panels. The images on the screen effectively show the appraisal process that the applicants' consultants have been through to look at what might be the best carbon reduction solution now, but also over time as the development would near completion. So the top table is effectively benchmarked against a scheme which would just use conventional boilers. It shows the relative levels of carbon saving that could be achieved with different technologies. Now, on the current day basis, connection to cell chip performs far better than other technologies, but with the projections of how the national grid is decarbonising, the technical analysis undertaken by the applicant's consultant shows that there's a good chance that that will be overtaken as being the better carbon solution in the longer term. All of this means that the priority set out in the London Plan to have centralised heat networks served by a central boiler plant hasn't been delivered here. It means that a connection to cell chip hasn't been pursued in the short term, although the Section 106 agreement would include a review mechanism such that at different stages in the development programme, the feasibility of connecting to cell chip will be revisited, and if it proves that it's technically viable, commercially viable, and would achieve a better carbon solution, then there's the opportunity to pursue that connection. The strategy has been reviewed at length by both the Council, the GLA, and WSP Parsons Brinckerhoff on behalf of the Council. And I think collectively, the feeling and the feedback from a GLA is that whilst it's not entirely compliant with the London Plan, there are a number of benefits to this approach. I think all parties would consider that the technology being pursued by British Land is innovative. It's a bit more footloose, which means they can adapt if better technologies arrive in the future. And ultimately, it will deliver the carbon savings demanded by the London Plan. Obviously, with a scheme of this magnitude, there is a comprehensive Section 106 agreement that sits alongside the officer report that's currently being drafted. I think Chapter 19 of the committee report sets out in broad terms what the 106 would cover, and the majority of those issues are listed on the screen over there. I suppose in terms of the key categories, the 106 would secure key components of the development. So that includes the affordable housing, affordable workspace, affordable retail space, and the terms of each of those typologies. It would also secure the delivery of the public realm and other key infrastructure, including the expansion of schools and health facilities. And it would include a range of financial payments that have been determined either as a result of our standard payments that are set out in the Council's Section 106 and SIL supplementary planning document. So that covers issues like carbon offset fees and employment and training contributions. And it also includes some bespoke agreements that have arisen as a result of the particular characteristics of this scheme. Now, even though the officer report is sort of comprehensive on the scope of the 106. It doesn't say very much about the financial value, and it's probably worth mentioning that the viability appraisal that all parties have agreed represents a reasonable baseline for this scheme. It does make an allowance for around £90 million of Section 106 contributions, in addition to around £90 million of CIL contributions.
Thank you. So you've heard a summary, albeit quite a long summary, of what is a very complex scheme. Having assessed the proposal in response to the development plan and considered the impacts and the measures to mitigate them, officers have concluded that the scheme does accord with the development plan and the National Planning Policy Framework when read as a whole. As Michael said earlier, the ES was found to be sound. The equality statement shows how the range of uses and spaces provide opportunities for social interaction and to foster good relations. Phased development means that uses which may disproportionately benefit people with protected characteristics can be re-provided in the scheme. And the report sets out how account has been taken of the public sector equality duty in reaching a balanced recommendation. The objections raised have been noted and set out in the report and in the addendum, but on balance, officers conclude that the range, the scale and the extent of the benefits of the scheme significantly outweigh any harm caused, and the scope of the development to transform Canada Water is key to the delivery of the aspirations of the Area Action Plan. So on that basis, as shown on the screen, officers have recommended that planning permission be granted, subject to completion of the Section 106 agreement and referral to the Mayor. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Very comprehensive, detailed presentation. Thank you very much indeed. Are there any initial questions from members? And members, it's really questions which are adding to what's been said. Okay, Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Chair. I have transport questions as well. I imagine they come later. Yeah? Okay, cool. Quite a while ago, you made a comment that Phase 1 would be constructed in areas that are unencumbered by present buildings. Am I right about that? Yep. How encumbered will be the buildings that do exist? And in terms of construction and effects of light on those buildings that presently exist?
BL would like to start, and obviously the easiest place to start is on something which is not currently occupied by a building. They also have a pressure start because their GLA grant is time limited. So the only active use, if you like, on the sites which are identified for Phase 1 is the interim petrol filling station, which they want to retain or need to retain to satisfy Tesco's requirements. So that can be relocated within the area currently used as car parking. So that allows them to make a start, basically. The second part of the question is about impact.
Okay, you've now identified, I can see it, what you're talking about. I just wondered if there were going to be any construction issues for people that already live there.
No, that's fine, thank you. And who's next? Councillor Morris and then Councillor Wayne. I haven't got you, Councillor Whittam, don't you worry. Councillor Morris first.
Yeah, just on the addendum report and the daylight and sunlight tables, there's been quite a few corrections to that. Some of them relatively minor, I know, but I just wondered if they're just... I haven't seen an explanation as to what those where those have come from. If you could just explain.
Well, two reasons, I think. One is that there's been some discrepancies throughout the process between these summary tables, which are very easily digestible and readable, presented in the environmental statement, and the much more complicated and vast daylight and sunlight assessment prepared by Gordon Ingram Associates. So there's just been a bit of an iterative process to try and reconcile the two. And I think some of the areas that have crept in are just in summarising the impacts on properties. So you'll see that they tend to be corrections for properties where we present them as a single line rather than as perhaps a couple of pages as they're presented in the wider technical report. The exception to that rule is on the Quebec Quarter, where one of the blocks was missing from a summary table. We've reviewed that, we've looked at it with our technical consultants, and I think the changes before you in the addendum don't get to the heart of the daylight and sunlight impacts. They don't affect the conclusions in the report.
Councillor Vers, and then Councillor Whittam.
My question is to Mr. Lee. Just some general principles about viability to be outlined at the start, if that would be helpful. Slide 8 in relation to the development plan and the policy framework in which we're considering the application, making reference to the London Plan core strategy and the Save Southwark plan and the new London Plan. There is a wide width, if you like, in terms of minimum and maximum expectations, both in relation to the number of homes delivered and the number of jobs. So I would like to know more or understand a little better in terms of viability, the rationale around the delivery of the 35%, the points at which we can later review, or there is an undertaking to review that, or to reassess it in relation to an uplift of 40%, which is capped, and how you can explain the variation between, if you like, minimum maximum scenarios in relation to the minimum scenario seems to be around 700 affordable homes out of a rough total of 2.5, rising up to potentially to 40% of over 4,000 being 1,600 plus. So I would like, in relation to viability in your assessments, how you sit within the minimum and maximums that we've been given in terms of policy. So we've got a minimum core strategy which is 9 years old, but we've got an emerging New London Plan which says 5,000 homes is the aspiration in that point.
Thank you. So if I take the last point first, the range of affordable housing delivery between 700 and 1,400 units, that merely relates to the mix of uses that will be proposed in the scheme. So as you all have heard from the officers, there is an ability for the applicant to alter the mix of uses within the development. So the lower end of that range will simply relate to a lower overall quantum of residential housing being delivered across the whole scheme with more commercial. Whereas the other side, of the 1,400 units, that would be where the applicant is providing a greater quantum of residential overall and less commercial.
Residential is the greater land value, isn't it, in terms of land use?
The commercial has the potential also to generate significant land values. So when the affordable housing and the private housing are taken together, the land value they generate can be on a par or can be less than the commercial values.
The balance on whichever is front-loaded first, whether you go with residential or commercial. So in essence, if you have a dominant use that you put out or develop first, then you run out of space to get the balance. So I just want to make that point as well, in relation to the strategy that the council's adopted in relation to the review for the 40% cap.
Well, my understanding is that the scheme can flip different buildings. It's probably a planning officer point rather than for me, but the scheme can flip buildings between different uses throughout the scheme, so that there is capacity at various points over the development period for buildings to be built as residential or as commercial.
Councillor Whittam.
Coming back to Mr. Lee, in paragraph 245, it gives the square meterage of what the viability was based on. And if you add those figures up, it comes to 4,700, no, I'm getting that wrong, 471,895. 471,895. Whereas when you look at paragraph 52, the total maximum square meterage is 656,200. So my question is the other 28% of land not counted in the viability? Or why are those numbers so wildly different?
The application gives the applicant the ability or the flexibility to provide different types of building.
Within the scope of the overall master plan, they have the ability to provide more residential or less residential depending on market conditions at the time. So the viability is based on a master plan that's been designed by the architect. There is potential that the floor space can increase over and above that modeled master plan.
But surely the amount of money that is generated by that extra 28% of land is huge and would affect the viability enormously.
Perhaps if I can just add this, I mean, I'm sure as you can appreciate, we've been looking at the viability of this scheme in various iterations of appraisals and looking at different inputs over the course of the best part of 2 years, and there's been a huge amounts of paperwork provided. I think the applicant's viability consultants have provided something in the region of 500 pages of clarifications and additional notes alone. This is one of the things we picked up with them earlier in the year, and the response from the applicant team was that what seems like a discrepancy is because of the way in which different floor space figures have been used in relation to net internal area, gross internal area, or gross external area, and depending on which one of those metrics you use, the overall amounts can look very different. I think one of the questions that ourselves with BNPP and the GLA questioned very early on in this process was that there seems to be a big gap and the building seems to be very inefficient. I think the response from the applicants is that that's largely in part due to the extent of basements in the scheme, which is partly a policy response because we've told them that they can't do servicing activities from street level. But that means you have lots of space within each building which is not generating value as such, or not in the same way. I think the nearest comparison the applicants provided is that if you were to factor up some of those lower numbers that you're talking about and convert them into gross external area, that gets you to around about 630,000 square metres, which is very close to the cap that we talked about in the development specification.
Well, we'll leave that one there for now, but coming back to figure 11 on page, or in paragraph 52, we have a maximum square meterage on the right hand side of that, and if you add those figures up, you get over 1 million, and the total cap is 56200, which means that only half of that, the numbers on the right hand side, will actually be used. Now that worries me when you've got the community facilities at 45,650 and the retail and workspace and residential at very high figures, which may take up most of the 656,200, and then all of a sudden we haven't got enough space left for communal facilities. So I want to know how that is going to be monitored over the life of the project, so that you don't find at the end that there is no room for community facilities or culture or student accommodation.
Thank you, Councillor.
I understand the point. It's largely a function of the degree of flexibility sought in the application, but where community facilities are specifically required because they're a policy requirement or they are identified as a need to mitigate the development. So for instance, on the health centre, on 16 plus education, on the replacement cinema, what are the other ones? There's some other ones which, and they would be defined in section 106, so they would have to provide those things. And the other part of the process is that are things called reconciliation statements, which would need to come forward with all of the reserved matters applications, which track how things are being developed through the process. So it's always been acknowledged that you're right, that I think we said this in the briefing, that the right-hand column does add up more than the total quantum of uses they can develop. And that's because of the ability to switch between a more residentially focused or a more commercially focused scheme. But there are certain elements which, notwithstanding that, are protected and secured as minimum quantums.
Forgive me.
Can I just
Okay, I'm
ask
going
for
to allow one more question. I'm just conscious of time.
that we have a maximum number there? Why can't we have a minimum number as well?
Where minimums are, as I said earlier, you know, a policy requirement or a mitigation requirement, they will be secured in the Section 106 agreement. We can perhaps give you a bit more information on that if that's something that you're interested in. We can do that. But they're not secured as minimums in the development specification. The development specification is a submission document, so it's not for us to amend it now, but we can control it through other means if it's justified and reasonable under the Section 106.
Councillor Morris, yes.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm slightly concerned. Obviously, the Canada Water Master Plan has been worked on for years. It's it's been sort of identified as a I don't know why I'm echoing so much here. It's been identified as a sort of new town centre and a destination. I have some concerns about the volume of retail that's projected. High streets all over the country are being bailed out by the government because they're failing, and I just wondered what safeguards we've got in terms of the managing and the adaptation as time, because obviously this is again a long programme as time goes along. Because what we don't want is a load of empty shop properties which have been put in because they have to be shop properties that. Who knows whether retail will be completely dead? Maybe nobody will go into an actual shop.
I need your question, Councillor.
So my question is, what safeguards have we got, and does what we've got before us in terms of all the documentation and all the conditions and everything protect us in the event that as time goes on, that becomes less and less of a viable proposition?
Yes, it's an interesting question. I think we have to recognise that British Land are one of the nation's largest retail landlords, and they have brought forth this scheme. So they clearly feel that it is something which can be delivered. What the application does allow for is a lot of flexibility in the type and range of retail uses that they can bring forward. So, for instance, the scope for a lot of food and drink type uses, evening economy. The AAP wants to deliver a vibrant town centre and specifically mentions growing the evening economy. It is something which is seen as a positive thing for Canada Water. They also have a lot of ability to bring forward leisure-related uses under that heading as well. So, if they were to replace the Tesco store, which is the proposition, that is a big chunk of the retail floor space that you're seeing in numbers in the application. So, mustn't forget that. And they do consider, and I'm sure they'll tell you that they do think that this has got the potential to be a good retail centre. And even the most recent retail studies done for the council about the capacity for retail in the borough does suggest that there is a need for growth, that we're losing a lot of expenditure out of the borough. People are shopping outside the borough because we haven't really got good major town centres in Southwark. And they see that this could be one that, because of its environment, its advantages of things like the dock and the green environment, it could be something there which is a positive draw for a bigger area, and that it can work as a retail centre, notwithstanding the fragility, as you say, in the broader sector.
Sorry, Chair, can I also add that it also is by design, it's different from the existing shopping complex that you see. It is more flexible and made up of many plots, retail, lots of frontages and active frontages by design, so that it has inbuilt flexibility to allow a range and incorporate a range of retail offers as well as other commercial offers.
If I can ask members to bear with me, I don't want to take further questions this time. I know there are other questions we want to ask, I can see that, but I'm just conscious of time. It's just after 8, and I'm really keen that the objectors are given sufficient time to make their presentations. So with your indulgence, I'd like to move forward. Can I ask if there are objectors in the room? Right here then. If there's a spokesperson for the objectors, please would you come forward? And can I ask you please to introduce yourself? And when I say go, you've got 4, you have 5 minutes, as is this most exceptional of applications. And as you get to 4 minutes 30, I will indicate that you have 30 seconds remaining. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Brian Hodge. I'm a local resident of Rotherhithe, and I've been asked by a consortium of local stakeholders to put forward an outline of our broad objections.
Welcome. Please start now.
Thank you, Chair. Overall, local stakeholders recognise the importance and the opportunity that the sites offer for development and the need that the area has for housing. However, any development proposal need to meet the standards set out in the Canada Water Area Action Plan. Our consortium of objectors have focused our objections in key areas: green spaces and nature environment, transport with road and non-road, design and density, site-specific, i.e. K1, A1 and A2, and community infrastructure. And I will outline those as I go along. Which was widely the AAP was widely consulted upon and well regarded by the community. The AAP was in place before the applicant submitted the proposals, and as such the appellant is well aware of the content. And no need to make notes because I'll pass around copies of what I'm saying at the end of it. The well-being of residents in the area, to the natural environment and the biodiversity of species. And it's quite important that given the current state of the climate emergency, that a lot of what is there should be there. These spaces are used for relaxation, for health and well-being, for education and for scientific research, and as a route of independent off-road, non-motorised transport through the area. Any development proposal should not interfere with or cause any damage to these important green spaces. If I can go to non-road transport, any application of the size will have a major impact on the current transport provision. With the Jubilee line already at capacity and the promised relief of the Elizabeth line still some way away, the premise that the opening of a new line will lead to a 10% reduction of passengers on the Jubilee line, as suggested by TfL and British Land, cannot be tested. We doubt the application's premise, and we are very concerned that if we are correct, any remedial action to reduce passenger numbers on the Jubilee line will be very difficult to achieve in retrospect. Just last Friday, Canada Water Station, as is quite often, was closed due to overcrowding, causing significant distress and inconvenience to many of the local residents. The station is closed regularly during the extended rush hour due to platform and train overcrowding. The overcrowding extends to the ticket hall. Our concerns for public safety at the present time are significant. A passenger incident due to current overcrowding and crushing is highly likely, and an increase in the passenger numbers along the line will only increase the likelihood of this. We have to record that this is to ensure to the planning committee that this should be noted in the future. The Canada Water Master Plan is just one of the several large-scale developments in the area along the Jubilee line. Timber Pond Yard in Deptford, London City Island, other developments, Canning Town and Canary Wharf, West Ham and Stratford. Recently announced transport improvements in the area list only a new entrance at Surrey Quays, a new station at Surrey Canal serving the developments in the surrounding area, and an additional 4 trains per hour on the overground, which will do nothing to assist in the issues relating to Canada Water and the pressure on local people's use of that station. Clearly, additional bus routes will help, but the report contains no details and puts the decision back to a review. The refusal to build a pedestrian and cycle bridge linking Rotherhithe to Canary Wharf is a concern. The report admits increases in traffic and road congestion, but no mitigation. There is already significant road congestion and other gridlock on the Rotherhithe roundabout, on Lower Road, roads towards the Old Kent Road, Jamaica Road, and access roads to the Rotherhithe Peninsula. Making this worse renders the improvements to bus services and cycle lanes meaningless and will result in dangerous air quality levels as well as dangerous roads for all users. There is a lack of joined-up thinking on transport. The Rotherhithe Movement Plan is only mentioned once in passing at paragraph 420, but I can't see that the impact of that is assessed together.
30 seconds.
It is assessed with the impact of other. It is really going to be possible to prevent delivery vans and mopeds accessing the flats and therefore increasing traffic. We need bold solutions. The application should not lower current Canada Water residents' quality of life due to inappropriate planning for transport. On site specifics, we know that all sites have a density higher than in the Canada Water Area Master Plan, in the Action Plan. So must be of exceptional design and quality.
Your time is up.
So to be approved by the Planning Committee.
Thank you very much indeed, Brian. Could you just turn off your microphone, please? Thank you. So first of all, before I begin this, I just want to make sure my comments at the beginning of the meeting are remembered, that we'll take this sequentially by themes. Please do not interrupt, and I'll ensure that there is maximum participation by all those who wish to make a contribution. Yes, thank you. If I can have that, it'd be very useful, and I'll start with Councillor Newen in a second. I receive that. In fact, Councillor Newen, you go ahead with your question.
Thank you. I wanted to ask if there was anything else you'd like to add.
There's quite a lot. Literally on K1, this is probably the most important. The decision on this site is not social housing versus butterflies. It's about judging whether the proposed development is appropriate to the site. All stakeholders listed in the appendix surrounding K1 have deemed what is currently planned as to be inappropriate. We do not believe that 100% social housing on this site, away from the main development, is in accord with the Mayor's London plan of creating communities of mixed and balanced tenure to foster social diversity, redress social exclusion, supported by effective and attractive design, adequate infrastructure and enhanced environment. The Canada Water Area Action Plan identified the site as suitable for a number of uses, including housing, with a number of residential units at 28, though the current plans propose 79, an increase of 282%, and well over double the habitable rooms per hectare that was anticipated in the core strategy. Given the site is adjacent to Russia Dock Woodland, which is designated as a local nature reserve and overlooks Alfred Salter Primary School and St John's Catholic Primary School, K1 builds to a height of 5 to 6 stories, which is at least 2 stories higher than any current development in the area. Backing onto Russia Dock Wood, breaking planning precedent which was aimed to protect the woodland and its users' enjoyment. Its height should be reduced by 3 or 4 stories and follow the gradient to make sure that the development of Claremont House and Quebec Quarter are followed. This would bring the number of residential units closer to double what were consulted upon in the Canada Water Area Action Plan instead of triple. The schools are part of a low-rise neighbourhood, and this must be preserved in future developments. The great height of the building provides future residents an inappropriate view of Alfred Salter Primary School playing fields and play area, as well as St John's outside classroom space and play areas, while subsequently overshadowing them to a great extent, depriving children of much needed sunlight. We believe that the development is neither appropriate nor proportionate. In brief, the consultation on this site was never as detailed as the main plan. It did not appear as a development site until the very end of the process, denying local stakeholders the opportunity to be consulted or make prudent decisions based on a building's existence. Local stakeholders were not contacted by BL until March 2018 about this site, very late in the Canada Water Master Plan process. We believe that with some joint work between the local community, this site or one close by could be built forward with a more suitable and proportionate development, or even as a more suitable use such as a local eco business centre, which would add enormous value and create jobs. Just briefly, in A1, we have a number of concerns. The historic listed dock office will be dwarfed, obscured, and will have loading bays in front of the servicing of the A1 building. Lorries 69 regularly will be coming off Surrey Quays Road in front of the dockmasters. has a dock office which is currently visible looking west on Surrey Quays Road from the tube will be completely obscured, and the podium height of the new building is taller than the lower historic building, so it will be utterly dwarfed. The A1 tower is not unique or of an exemplary design. If you see Hayden Point in Nine Elms, which is a site similar, that was nominated for the Carbuncle Cup, voted by architects. That's one of the worst buildings in the country. A1 produces appalling overshadowing for residents of Orchard House and Columbia Point, while large numbers of windows failing even lower accepted levels in the directive. A2, the leisure centre, disabled parking bays in front of the building on Deal Porters Way are not close enough to the leisure centre entrance to make this acceptable. The brief for the leisure centre has never kept pace with the intensification of the scheme. The privacy of Hoffield Place, as you heard, is dependent on a series of planters, and there must be conditions that they are properly maintained. No consideration is given to the fact that the report states that 69 vehicles a day will reverse, and A2 also produces overshadowing in breach of directives. Very briefly, on community infrastructure, what does the community get out of this development? And that's quite important. We are people there. It's something that's going to be put onto us. You might say a new health centre, but we have one of those. You might say a new leisure centre, but we have one of those. You might say a new shopping centre, but we have one of those. You might say improved public transport, but that improvement is merely untested, incomplete and assessed potentially. You also might say a new pocket park, but we currently have great parks and open spaces. There are no overshadowing by overtly dominant development and do get good daylight. British Land cannot agree to continuity of cinema provision, so there may be a period of some years between the existing cinema closing and the new permanent cinema being provided. Bowling and bingo might not survive. Pressure on existing green areas, either Russia Dock Woodland and Southwark Park, will intensify, and there are only 4 tennis courts. Just in conclusion, this application as a hybrid has the greatest part of the development in the later stages. If approved in principle, in this application, these stages would be in outline. We would call for a full consultation as those later plots come forward. There must be a condition that every parcel of land plot is bought for full public consultation. Overall, it is disappointing that although there are major contraventions of planning policy and adverse impacts on residential well-being and on several parts of the current Canada Water area, these are brushed aside in favour of future benefit as defined by the applicant. In summary, we would like the committee to defer a decision on K1 so that proper consultation can be carried out, ensure that the housing review that's mentioned in the report has clear and transparent guidelines, and ensure that all future developments have full and proper consultation.
Thank you for your complete and very detailed response. Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Chair. Our lovely friend from TfL might be able to help me answer this question. Were you aware that the Silvertown Tunnel is going to be built, which will be a toll tunnel, and therefore they will also be tolling the Blackwall Tunnel, which means that the first free crossing of the river will be the Rotherhithe Tunnel? Have you taken those potential increases in traffic flows into account?
We haven't, but in terms of overall transport, there is someone from Canary Wharf who may wish to comment on some of those, because it is a very important issue. We're just very worried about the overall transport impact. I don't know if any of my colleagues want to come and answer some of those questions, but the answer is no at this stage. We've looked at transport in.
If you wish someone else to answer a more detailed question in that regard, yes, I'm happy for that. If you could introduce yourself, please.
Hello, my name is Howard Dauber. I'm the Managing Director of Strategy and Transport for Canary Wharf Group. I'd like to talk a little bit about public transport, because that has a direct impact on all the on the road issues.
Sorry, that wasn't my question.
Okay.
Do you just want to repeat your question, Councillor O'Brien, please, just for clarity?
It's just bullet point 2, you've got transport road and non-road. I was wondering if you've taken into account the Silvertown Tunnel, which will be tolled, which means the Blackwall Tunnel will be tolled, which means the first free crossing for motor vehicles will be the Rotherhithe Tunnel. And I was wondering if that additional traffic had been taken into account.
I can just repeat, not specifically by us, but clearly we're watching everything that goes on, particularly with the Rotherhithe movement plan, which is currently being consulted upon.
And if I may, as you're sitting there, what is the interest of the Canary Wharf Group in relation to this application and in regards to transportation?
I should say that we don't normally object to other developments. In fact, in the last 30 years, this is the first time we've objected to a development in another borough. Our concern is specifically on the impact on the Jubilee line, which is obviously of crucial importance to Canary Wharf and has been pointed out by Mr. Hodge to a number of other developments along the route.
Please, further details, please.
I'm happy to explain. Right. Like I said, I'm here in sorrow rather than anger. We really have been talking to Transport for London and British Land about this project for the last year and a half and hoped not to be here. Really hope that we get to a position where we'd be able to withdraw our application, but sadly not. We don't think you can support this project on transport grounds for the following 5 reasons. First of all, overcrowding. This project, the transport impacts of this project actually rely on the overcrowding on the underground and overground being so bad that people will choose to use other routes. The applicants of Transport for London admit that this proposal will overload the Jubilee line and make life difficult for residents using Southwark, Bermondsey, London Bridge, Canada Water and other stations on the line, and therefore will have a knock-on effect on the entire borough's transport system. It says on page 101 of the report tonight that the Jubilee line is already at capacity now. In fact, our studies show it's running at about 105% of capacity, and the overground is already near capacity. There simply is not enough public transport to cope with another 13,000 or more peak hour journeys. The second issue is about capacity. This expectation that there will be enough capacity, even when people are using other lines, relies on London Underground providing 32 trains per hour. They're currently supposedly providing a service of 30 trains an hour, but actually our studies have shown that they're missing this target 95% of the time. So we don't think that 32 trains an hour can be relied upon. In fact, the original transport assessment put to the council at the end of last year suggested that there'd be 34 trains an hour on the Jubilee line, and that is not going to happen until at least 2040. So the capacity that would be able to cope with this is not going to be there. The third thing is investment. We think local residents are being shortchanged. This is one of a small number of very large schemes across London, but the other schemes of similar size have provided specific direct contributions towards improved transport capacity, and we do not see why this scheme should not be required to do the same. For example, at Canary Wharf, £700 million of investment have been put in towards the Docklands Light Railway, Jubilee and Crossrail directly by the developer. At Battersea, £300 million was put in towards the Northern Line extension. At King's Cross, £250 million, and at Royal Arsenal, which is a much smaller scheme than this one, £85 million was put in towards the Crossrail station. Here, there's nothing remotely equivalent. There's about, in our view, between 100 and 200 million pounds of transport commitment missing here. And in fact, given that the mayoral sill levels here, which generate the transport contribution to the mayor, are a third of the rate that they are at Canary Wharf, they're actually saving £35 million on office space compared to if the same buildings were built the other side of the river. The fourth thing is that there are some serious documents missing, pieces of research missing from your papers tonight. There is a document called a Strategic Transport Study for this project, produced by the London Borough of Southwark and Transport for London, which has not been published. It's referred to in the report and in the GLA report, but it's not published, it's not here, it's not on the website. And I think on that basis alone, that key document is not in the public domain, it makes it difficult to support this application tonight. There's no comparison of transport with the scheme and without the scheme. It's very difficult to see what the impact of the scheme is if you can't say this is what the transport is going to be like with it, this is what it's going to be like without it. That's actually a requirement of the National Planning Policy Framework. And the rail plan modelling here hasn't looked at the difference between the morning and evening peaks. And fifthly, as eloquently represented by Mr. Hodge, don't take our word for it, because more objections to this scheme have been made on transport grounds than any of the other grounds, and there's a number of local residents who already experience overcrowding and difficulties on the current network. They are the people who live with this on a day-to-day basis, and they're saying that this shouldn't go ahead. So we do think this scheme should be deferred until we've got all the documents on transport, and it should only go ahead if the applicant makes a significant contribution towards increased capacity on the Jubilee line.
Thank you very much. Questions from committee members? Councillor Rose, and any others? First of all, any others we should talk? No? Okay, go. Councillor Rose.
I'm slightly moving away from transport in this instance. You mentioned...
Sorry, Councillor.
Do you want to keep it?
Yeah, could take this. Yeah, transport. Yeah, Councillor Hargrove.
Thank you, Mr. Dorber. What's your view on the potential for the New Elizabeth line to take up demand that's currently on the Jubilee line, particularly through Canary Wharf?
I've spent the last 20 years of my life working that project, and it will soak up about 5 years of capacity. The reason for that is that when the Jubilee line opened, there was not the Olympic Park, there was not the Dome, Canary Wharf was half the size, Wembley hadn't been rebuilt, London Bridge hadn't been redone, and schemes like this haven't come forward. So the Jubilee line, as currently built, was providing a significant additional capacity for a relatively empty route. The capacity of the Jubilee line now is now completely full. Crossrail actually serves only the northern side of London. It doesn't serve the key pieces of transport on the Jubilee line, which are Waterloo and London Bridge. That's where a lot of commuters come in to go both to Canary Wharf, but also to the West End, and presumably into this scheme as well, if there's going to be significant office development there. So it does provide some relief, but it doesn't provide specific relief to this corridor. So, you know, you get about 5 or 10 years of growth, but after that, you're back to very, very severe overcrowding. And in fact, that's reflected in the Mayor's transport strategy, the Mayor of London's transport strategy, where by 2040, the Jubilee line will be one of the most severely overcrowded routes on the whole network.
Sorry, just to add, as I said, we don't believe any of those figures. We just want to see it occur. You know, the experts can say it will impact. I don't believe it, and so neither do any of the local residents there.
Thank you. Councillor Sims.
Thank you, Chair. In your presentation, you mentioned a couple of reports that you stated that are missing that would have been for the benefit of the committee members and the public, namely the strategic transport study and comparative reports, etc. What specifically would you say are the key elements that would you would allude us in terms of interest related to this particular application that we don't have observation of currently, please?
Well, the key one is the strategic transport study, because that's actually referred to, and some of the documents associated with that are referred to, but the document itself hasn't been published, which is, and we've asked for it several times. We've asked the London Borough of Southwark for it, we asked British Land for it, we've asked Transport for London for it, and it hasn't been provided. Although at one point they did say it will be published in the fullness of time. So we're looking forward to that. I guess one of the key questions for Transport for London here is if they are confident, and I am astonished that they seem to be, that this development of this size doesn't have a sort of, you know, a catastrophic impact on the Jubilee line. Is it possible after this for the Jubilee line to cope with any additional development at all, or does this fill up all of the remaining capacity on the line? I suppose the question should be asked of the London Overground as well. You know, is this the final straw that breaks the camel's back, or is this final straw before the one that breaks the camel's back?
Thank you, Councillor Rose. Yes.
transport related. Buses in particular. There was an outline from officers in relation to the vision they have for improving north-south access, an access route on New Deal Porters Way. And an analogy was drawn with Lordship Lane, which happens to be an area that we know very well. I have part of my ward in it. And I know how that functions, and I know recent revisions to TfL services and the bus flow and the impact that can have. Can you outline more specifically to you currently what you think are the 3 issues with buses, lateral routes and horizontal in the area?
At the moment, all buses go down Surrey Quays Road, and all that is being suggested is that some of those routes, including possibly 2 new ones somewhere, go along Deal Porters Way. Deal Porters Way is just currently a car park and land over the overground tunnels, which are fairly high at some points along there. So as yet, nobody has provided any details about all the new bus movements and what's going where. Are they going to take everything away from Surrey Quays Road? Are some still going down Surrey Quays Road? At the moment, buses serve both ends of the shopping centre, one at the Canada Water bus station and the other at the shopping centre, and then they all go down Surrey Quays Road. Presumably some of those will go down, and presumably some of the new ones. But there is no detail. It's just suggested that there will be a review in due course. What worries me is when somebody suggests 2 new bus routes, what happens to the existing bus routes?
Thank you for your response. Councillor Sims.
Yes. Also, you mentioned the lack of funds to support this particular application. You stipulated between 100 and 120 million that the applicants haven't put forward. What, in your professional view, what would, in terms of the omission of a strategic, in your view, a strategic transport plan for this particular application, what would that additional funds, if it were to come forward, what would that do to alleviate the problems already outlined by yourself and the Objector?
Well, there's a very direct answer to that, because just over 2 years ago, Transport for London, London Underground Limited, decided to cancel the purchase of 10 additional trains for the Jubilee line, which would have increased the frequency of trains to 34 trains an hour. Had they gone ahead and bought those trains, then the 34 trains an hour on the Jubilee line would be coming into place in time to cope with this development. And funny enough, the cost of that is in the region of £100 million. So the Transport for London decided not to go ahead with that investment. A contribution from this scheme, and I have to say from the schemes as well along the Jubilee line, could have been made to cover the cost of those new trains, provide the capacity, which would have meant that this wouldn't have led to the catastrophic overcrowding. So there's a specific purchase of trains that could have been made, and that would have solved most of those capacity issues.
Just Councillor Newlands.
I was going to develop the same thing, but in terms then of what you've said, you think that the problems that you have highlighted with transport could be solved by the purchase of an additional 10 trains to run on the existing Jubilee line, and you would not expect that you needed to build new tunnels or new train lines. We're just talking, you could fix it with 10 additional trains.
You could fix a lot of the problems with 10 additional trains. The Jubilee line is one of the most modern lines on the network. Its design capacity could take it up to a theoretical 36 trains an hour. As I said, there was already a plan from LUL and TfL to purchase additional trains to get it to 34 trains an hour, which they decided to not to go ahead with. In our view, that was a mistake. I think this scheme demonstrates that the capacity, that additional capacity is needed. If you're going to build anything on this site of any size, that additional capacity is going to be needed. And I think it's a good opportunity to revise that decision and to increase the frequency of trains on the line.
Further questions on transport? Councillor Whittam.
Do you think the addition of another bus around the peninsula on Salter Road is needed?
Short answer, I believe it's needed, and I think a lot of people do. An awful lot of movement goes around the peninsula, people going from various parts of the peninsula to one of the two stations, either Canada Water or Surrey Quays. Yeah, I think it would make a great difference.
Thank you. If I may, I know there are additional questions on transport we could ask, but I'll just suggest that we've asked the core questions at the moment. There are further elaborations I would like to make, but I won't make them right now. And I want to thank you for your contribution. It was most insightful. Can I now move on to green spaces and the natural environment as seen by Brian? Any questions in that regard? Any questions in that regard? Councillor Hargreaves.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Hodge. You spoke about any development proposals should not interfere with or cause any damage to these important green spaces. How do you think it might be the case that this damage is occurring?
Can I bring some of my colleagues forward who have very good expertise in this?
Can I ask you please to introduce yourselves?
My name is Rebecca Clark. I am the Treasurer of the Friends of Stavehill.
My name's Steve Cornish, local resident, and I'm the Chairman of the Friends of Russia Dock Woodland.
Sorry, Councillor, can I ask you just to repeat your question, just to make sure it's clear?
It's just to ask what foreseen damage that this development will cause to the green spaces in the area that's under.
We believe that there will be shading caused by the building. We have seen and read through the environmental impact assessment put in by Watermans and GIA and the transient overshadowing report. What we are saying is that we don't think that has gone far enough. If you'll excuse me for one moment. We think that the problem with the current daylight, sunlight and transient overshadowing reports, they are considering the effects of the proposed shading as if the local nature reserve were any other typical urban landscape. That is typical as in a species poor, predominantly hard surface landscape. The Ecology Park and Local Nature Reserve are not that typical landscape. They are established biodiverse habitat where the long-term effects of shading and reduction in radiant heat will have an adverse effect on soil temperatures. And this is our contention that they have not given enough thought to the long-term effect of loss of radiant heat. Would you like me to expand on that?
Yes, please, go ahead.
So, the environmental impact report and the addendum EIA report focused on sunlight hours and the May-July period. Sunlight hours for a start. We live in the British Isles. We expect cloudy, overcast days, far more so than sunlight ones. However, radiant heat from the sun, as anybody who has ever been sunburnt on a cloudy day, still passes through clouds. And that radiant heat from the sun will not pass through a solid object, such as a building. it's this permanent reduction of available radiant heat that will affect the soil and the living organisms within that soil. Living organisms within a soil, such as moth pupa, hibernating bumblebees, they have a set amount of energy because that they are invertebrates. Yes. They cannot generate energy, they store it. They have that set amount of energy to get them through colder periods. When that energy is gone, it's gone. These organisms are adapted to their environment. A bee has become a bee over centuries. It's unlikely that the living organisms in that affected area will be able to successfully cope with the artificially extended colder soil temperatures. And we contend that there will be colder soil temperatures because there is a building blocking radiant heat from the sun coming through and settling on the ground. So,
thank you for that very clear answer. I understood it, which is yep, go ahead. Yes.
May I continue for a moment? Within the environmental impact assessment presented by Watermans and GIA and the addendum report, they also refer to the May-July period as if this were the only important period. So, anybody who is a gardener and grow things knows that it is not just May, July when things are happening in the garden, in ecosystems. We are more concerned about late August to early November and early February to early March because these cover key life cycle stages. So at the end of summer to late autumn, you have grasshoppers laying their eggs, you have some moths and beetle larvae beginning their pupation stages, and you have caterpillars preparing to overwinter. You have bumblebees beginning to hibernate. From February to early March, you have things coming out of hibernation, newts, bees, etc. You have some butterfly and moth caterpillars preparing to move into chrysalis stage, and you have seeds beginning the germination period. So this is outside the May to July period, defined as most important by Watermans and EIA. We say the May to July period is the least period that we are worried about. The sun is high in the sky, shadows are shorter. It is the period outside that time that we feel there has not been enough consideration given to with regard to the lack of radiant heat.
Thank you for your very detailed answer. Please switch on your microphone for a moment there, please. So I'll take in sequence Councillor Hargroves and then Councillor Whittam. Is that right? Yep. Do you want to speak? Yep. Okay. No, maybe not then. Go ahead. Oh, Councillor Soames, indeed. Yep. Go ahead. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Ms. Clark, for that really detailed and enlightening description you give there, and that's really sort of banked in my mind what you've said there. But I'd like to ask you what the estimate of area we are talking about in terms of this impact.
This is again where I feel that the environmental impact assessment and the addendum report to the environmental impact assessment are somewhat misleading because they show the shading from the building first, and then that shading of the building, then the proposed shading, they show the proposed shading of the building first on the diagram in blue, and then that shading is overlaid by the shading from the existing trees. So you cannot see the full extent of the shading because the trees cover its footprint. So on one point, we think that shading is misleading perhaps to people who want to know what the full proportion of the shading is. Yes, you can't actually see it in those diagrams. Secondly, the shading diagrams as they are at present show trees that are no longer there. When British Land came for their site visit to Staple Ecology Park in May 2018, we walked around the area and I detailed where I thought would be affected. British Land pointed out that there were a number of trees in the area, and my response was that we would be felling a number of those trees as they were weed species and overshadowing the area. This was following our management plan, which was written in 2015 and runs to 2020. It is our woodlands management plan and was made available to the Borough Ecology Officer at the time. So British Land clearly knew that trees were going to be taken down. Watermans also knew that trees were going to be taken down. Watermans also knew that we had an existing tree management policy to remove trees, and this was not taken into account with the shading. So therefore, we are saying that both in actuality and in the diagrams that they have submitted, the affected area is much larger. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, much larger. Thank you.
Than quantified, yes.
Fair enough. Okay. Thank you again for your very detailed, very clear answer. Thank you very much. Councillor Sims.
On the same theme, I've been particularly interested in the radiant heat that you've referred to in terms of the effect that it has on the life cycle of minnow beasts that you stated. To what degree, in terms of reduction in temperature long term, would the life cycle of the mini beasts that you stated, the different species of mini beasts that you stated, would be affected? And are you aware of any methodology in terms of being able to actually ascertain that information? Is there a way of actually arriving at figures? Presumably there are, but if you could tell us a little bit more about that.
The subject of soil ecology has become very important recently, and I think that is part of what your question is about. The mini beasts, such as the moths and the bumblebees that you mentioned, the creatures that are in the soil, they are all part of an ecosystem. Yes. So it's so when I mention the moths will be affected, the bumblebees will be affected, I should also, except I didn't really want to bore you, I should also have mentioned that there would be smaller creatures, smaller organisms affected as well. So
talking about degrees in temperature.
Yes,
sorry.
So the short answer is that current research suggests that variations in temperature do affect soil ecosystems. I don't know by how much, because I am not a specific soil ecologist. I only know what I have observed. To find out simple things that you could do, you could take measurements from cold areas. You could take measurements from existing areas and see what the changes were over time. Is that answering your questions?
For now, we can always come back to you. Just turn off your mic, sorry, just for streaming, just turn off your mic. Councillor Newen, did you have a question, or yes? Or no?
Yeah, I suppose I'm really coming back on this point because I'm trying to understand the question that was put earlier. From the perspective of the question that was put earlier, I'm really trying to understand the extent the problem. I appreciate that you've said that it's not been drawn correctly because some of the trees are no longer there, but I'm also conscious, and I don't know. I mean, I would have raised it in a different part of the discussion, but I'm conscious also that it was said during the presentation of the Objector that K1 is the only building of that height, or it will be the only building of that height planned in that area. My recollection, having visited, is that there are other 5-storey residential blocks in the area. That's what I seem to recall. But anyway, coming back to the actual shadowing that will be given by that, specifically by that building, yeah, I'm just trying to understand, the area, perhaps in terms of percentage of the total, or even, in terms of square meterage. What actually are we? I'm trying to understand sort of, the extent that we're talking about.
Can I just sort of go in there? If you look at the buildings around K1, they step up from, there's some of them are slightly higher, but they step up from the Russia Dock Wood side. This one doesn't. This one is a block that's stuck there and doesn't face the ecology side of it at all. Whereas all the other buildings around there have been designed to ensure that there is a gap between the edge of the building and the Russia Dock woodland, and they rise and fall down towards Russia Dock woodland.
Yeah, just to come in on that, I wasn't really expecting this, but I'm really appreciative that you walked the area in January and also in September. That's fantastic. That is brilliant, because that's a big plus for the community, because you now realise what a fantastic area we've got and built up over 30 years, not 30 days, 30 months, 30 years. The answer to your question is, we have been in dialogue with all the other local developments surrounding Russia Dock Woodland and Stable Ecological Park. That's Fisher Close, Quebec Quarter, Claremont House, and the downtown site, which is going back 10 years ago. We all know that, I won't bore you to that. But we have had concessions on all those by dialogue with the developer. And the concessions are, as an example, recent is Quebec Quarter is 65% green space. The 5 fingers going in from Russia Dock Woodland on that southern boundary are the 5 fingers that we negotiated with the landowner and the developer, L&Q, at the time, going back many, many years. They are the pluses. The local population have recognised that involvement of us as 2 groups, Stable Ecological Park and Russia Dock Woodland, working not on behalf of the community, but with the community to get what we think is appropriate. And it doesn't affect the woodland or the ecological park. The latest one is Claremont House, which is finished, which is on the southern boundary of K1. It goes from on the periphery, if I want to read it out and bore you to death, of the core area. That is in between the core area periphery and the development site of K1. It goes from 7 stories down to 3, townhouse. Fisher Close is townhouse effect, respecting the woodland on its northern boundary. And Quebec Quarter does the same. It steps down from the periphery of the core area of Quebec Way down towards the woodlands and pays respect to the woodlands and ecology centre. All the others. So to just, I know you can't get everything in one day of walking around. I'm just trying to give you a picture of what we've been doing over many, many years to make sure the original woodland and Stable Ecological Park, only people's back gardens backed onto the woodland for obvious ecological reasons. We're trying to get away from that. Every time a developer comes in and we feel threatens our nature reserves, we will fight tooth and nail to stop. I'm just trying to, I know I'm getting emotional, tooth and nail to make sure it's appropriate rather than being inappropriate, and that's exactly why we're here. That's just on that one basic point.
But you were asking about the size of the area affected. We feel that the area that will be most directly affected is the butterfly area. There's was this is the main part of the site that was designated Britain's first urban butterfly sanctuary by Butterfly Conservation. But the ecology park and the wider nature reserve are a bit like a slightly saggy drum. If you push on one bit, it's going to have an effect on another. In the same way, if I poke somebody in the ribs, they are going to feel that pain travelling up to their ear or wherever. It's following up on recommendations from Butterfly Conservation 2012 report. We manage the site, both the ecology park and Rushadock Woodland, the wider local nature reserve, as a whole landscape. And we also take into account the additional landscape around us and manage the park as a reflection of that. We have to regard the whole peninsula, if you like, as a landscape, because that is how the ecology park will survive, working with those species coming in. Ecosystems are very delicately balanced. If you affect one part of the site, if you push down on one part of the site, it is going to push up on another. If you start shrinking available breeding space, if you start shrinking available mating or hibernating or seeding or growing space, then worst case possibility, that population of bee or butterfly or bug or flower, it will be too small. And populations, when they drop below a certain size, that's it, they're gone. End of.
Thank you. Thank you again for your very detailed response. If I may, I'd like to move on to the next theme that was raised by the objectors, that is design and density. Do you have questions in relation to design and density? Any further questions, design and density? No? Yep, fair enough. Now then, if I got it right, Mr. Hodge, you cited site-specific concerns in relation to K1, A1 and A2. Yep, Councillor Rose.
Yes, in relation to K1, I understand the point that you've made about blind tenure or integrated tenure of housing, and that being in principle critical to sort of balance communities going forward. But I also appreciate that in the area, and certainly in relation to the pupils attending the local primary schools, that will be comprised of families and children that will be drawn from established, long-standing council estates, which will be predominantly social housing, and then more recent private developments, which may have a mix of affordable in there, but there's predominant tenures. And in relation to the dynamic of those schools and that community, that's a given in relation to the nature of that area and this part of Southwark, and that there is a balance sometimes to be struck around the placement of large family units in a location that might best serve the needs of those families. Would you accept that as an interpretation of K1?
I think K1 has to be looked at as a site on the periphery. It is not within the main development site. It's a site stuck on the, basically stuck on the end. It's a existing use. Was a car park, and it is just there. This shouldn't be a debate about what the tenure is. It's about whether the building is suitable for that site. All of us believe that we need more council housing. There's no question about that, but we believe it can be delivered in sites across the main development. And I could set up an alternative site that would give you a better development and more council housing with very little changes to the existing bit. I've sat down and I've worked it all out on a different part. Yes, it's got to, you know, we recognise it's got to be built on. But what we want it to do is to recognise the whole of the rest of the area. So it's not about tenure, it's about the building. Yes, there needs to be more council housing, no question. I have said that for many, many, many years, and I still believe that that is absolutely right. And the more council housing we have, the better it is. But is it right on that site, and is that building right on that site? Once you decide the building, then you can decide the tenure. Sorry.
Just briefly, I won't walk away from him without saying this. The catalyst for this wrongdoing, if I can put it in those terms, is on page 141, 639, and if anybody reads that, no matter how intelligent you are or just a ordinary person in the street, the beginning is the bad part of this whole operation. And I state, I won't read all of it, I'll just read in inverted commas, the site is suitable for a residential development which fronts Roberts Close. Buildings should be lower at the rear of the site on the east to protect the sense of openness in Rushdot Woodland and its nature, conservation value. As the site is on the periphery of the corridor adjacent to Rushdot Woodland, there is opportunity to incorporate houses rather than flattened development. Everything in that statement has been abused. Everything in that statement. If you look at that statement and then you see what is proposed, I can't see, and anyone cannot see how you come to what is being proposed for that site. Plus, I must just put this in here, at the beginning, to have K1 come on the scene after years and years of talking to the British Land of hundreds of events. There's nothing wrong with it, it was all going swimmingly until K1 came on without the developer even consulting any of the local stakeholders. Now, if that's not a bad start, I don't know what is, and I'll just leave it there before I start getting it temper.
Councillor Sims.
Thank you, Chair. So can I be clear, are you saying that on that particular site where K1 is actually proposed to be, there shouldn't be anything given the previous, your colleagues and yourself's presentation on the ecology and the effects on the ecosystem? Are you saying that there shouldn't be anything
totally
there?
opposite. I've had notes to say, but obviously Brian's covered most of what I wanted to say. We are not, I've come from the Dickens, born in the Dickens estate in Bermondsey. You know, I'm a council resident, right, for half of my lifetime. So I know what it's all about, right? And we need social, affordable housing in our area, really affordable housing. But the K1 site, from the beginning, was not going to be built on by British Land for a long time. They told us, only anecdotally, that they were not going to build on it for a long, long time. We tried to get it as a growing area for the kids at the EIP in front of the planning inspector in 2014. So that's what we've tried to do over the years.
What's the alternative for that space? Sorry, that plot?
What we're trying to say, going back to that again, is it's 3 times over the Canada Water Area Action Plan density. 3 times, not 3%, not 10%, 3 times over the limit. So the local community are not the ones that are making the wrongdoing here. It is the development and the council talking together, thinking they can put that on there, no matter what housing is, as Brian says, put it on that land without the community arguing over the environment, transport links and all the things that go with it. So that's all I'm trying to say is the site is off of the periphery, it's against the woodland, it's against a 1-storey church, it's up against 2 1-storey junior schools. Now come on, be fair, be fair. You must be able to see why we're arguing against this one specific site, although there's other arguments on A1 and A2.
Sorry, I think the short answer to that is no. I think the short answer to that is no, we want to see the site developed, but we want to see it respecting what is in the area and an appropriate development. And we don't think that the current proposal is an appropriate one. And what we asked for was a deferral so that we can sit down with British Land and look at how you can deliver the housing on that site.
Yeah. So, we will take a 5-minute comfort break and allow committee members to return. 5-minute comfort break.
It is scary, no, you're quite right. Well done. You did very well.
I know I'm going to. I can't just bump it out away from my
Yeah, well, yes. I did have to have a double yeah, no, I thought they were quite difficult to know when to the time when I'm breaking in the flow. No, that no cultural my brother was thrown out in that. He thinks it's under control. But I had to decide whether you see the any fizzy drinks and I just thought to myself, it's too late the day to we're not going to have an hotel. So I decided I'm just going to say and watch my brother disown me at everything. He just says, oh God, you know, you can almost is it terrible? I said, so last year, stop writing and you write my jaw. You said write it all. Yes, it's weird, yeah. And Tesco's has this as well, and they were saying, and the reason didn't know this is part of it. Now, so equally at work, if I go into Boots, and I think, I'm just going to Tesco's while I'm yeah, they're suddenly saying that instead of being satisfied where I do think that counts as well. So you have to sort of you know, away from. But I did understand a bit about, you know, they said this about Free Street style, and then you can get into Tesco's Metro, and people will go to the Metro and think, I'm going to go to that bookshop. I never thought of so, but when there's a Metro, or in the same suddenly, that draws people to it, and then they walk past from the Independence. So they kind of hold it around all the same place. And so it is interesting to discuss something we don't
I'm fine, thank you. I do have a bottle somewhere.
Good job.
Completely off topic here. Sorry, sort of completely off topic here as
Can I ask you all now to start taking your seats? Please, would you now start taking your seats?
I'll stick to electronic. I usually talk with this stuff at the time.
So we're apparently one member short on the committee, so I have to wait for that member. I'm really sorry.
Suddenly it's the end.
All righty, we now have a full house. We shall resume. Can I turn to, if you're ready, Councillor Soames? Would you want to ask your question first of all? Thank you.
Yes, referring back to the K1 proposal, K1 plot proposal, and the effect that you have alluded to that it will have on the local schools in terms of the additional households overlooking the play space and teaching areas. Could you expand upon that, please?
Can I bring a couple of my colleagues forward?
Yes, of course.
Yes, I wasn't aware that there were teachers, because I was particularly...
That's fine, Councillor.
Oh, right. Oh, you're not? Who are you? Well, can you introduce it?
Forgive me,
Sorry.
Councillor, if you may. Can I ask you please to introduce yourselves, and my colleague will then ask you the question.
Pauline Aidenwaller, I'm speaking on behalf of Alfred Salter School. I was the governor there until a couple of months ago, but as I'd led on this particular project, I've been asked to carry on the remit through to this hearing.
And I'm Jane McManus. I'm the co-chair of governors at St John's Catholic Primary School. And we're not teachers.
Thank you very much for coming along. Councillor Soames, good question.
So I was interested in a number of areas of the report, namely the overlooking. So if you'd like to sort of say something about that, and then also the increased numbers, projected increased numbers. I have a question later on between today and the second time of this proposal on Monday to expand about the additional fundings that are proposed for the projected increased numbers. That's specifically for the officers, but that you might have some comments about the way in which the schools would actually use that additional funding, given that, and the impact that it will also have on increased numbers of students and pupils arriving in the area, on the capacity for local schools, given that we generally have a policy now of a 25 minimum to a class. So if you could just talk to us a little bit and help us, the committee members, that is, to better understand the impact that you think that additional housing will have on overlooking playgrounds and teaching areas, but also on schools, the present schools' capacity to be able to cope. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. As my colleagues have said, Alfred Salter is abuts site K1. We have, over the years, spent a long time talking with the developers of the other sites, particularly London Squares and Quebec Quarter, and have come to some mutually acceptable arrangement. It was, I think, the fact that the report says that we had lengthy discussions with London Squares, and the final result was a sensitive step-down development, which was what we were expecting for K1. The AAP clearly states that the policy for K1 was 28 residential homes stepped down towards the woodland. How it came to 79 is a big question. The report suggests on page 141, para 640, that very lengthy discussions took place. It begs the question, with whom? As my colleague said, K1 first appeared at an exhibition in January 2018. There'd been no prior discussions with anyone, despite the fact that British Land had been in the area talking about the master plan for many years prior to that. K1 is overpowering from the school grounds of Alfred Salter. School grounds are now used for teaching, their extended teaching spaces. So this site would dominate the outside teaching space, the teaching for PE and sports, the forest school science areas, etc., etc. There is after much ado, we managed to get a visualization because it was missing from the first submission. So I would direct you to the January 2019 view of plot 1 from Alfred Salter School. Finally, British Land came and took pictures from within. And if you look at figure 2 and that, you will see it really dominates the area. It's a visualisation. I mean, it's amongst all the official documents. I can pass it round if you want.
Forgive me, it's not in our
Well, it's in the official British Land application, so you would have seen it if you looked at all the documents. But I can. Right.
One moment, please.
Okay. No, the picture's not, but the picture refers to all the documents. So, I mean, it's.
Could you just pause for a moment, please? Just pause for a moment.
Right. Yeah, I didn't bring copies because I'd assumed you'd looked at it, but right.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Sorry, will that be made available? Is that available for?
No, it's amongst. It's called.
It's one of the 200 odd documents submitted with the application, and it's Pauline, if you hold it up, then the members can see what it's supposed to be.
All right. What is it entitled?
Views of plot 1 from Alfred Salter Primary School. Okay. As many of my colleagues have said, the design is not exemplary, which is another justification, or supposed to be, for such a dramatic departure from the AAP. This building is not suited for this location. It's also curious that the design review panel only reviewed A1 and A2 from what we can find from the documentation. So CABE did not review K1 because it was very late coming into the scheme. K1 dominates the outside teaching spaces and sports area. And where else have I not? I don't want to repeat myself. Alfred Salter School, like St John's, has a very high level of deprivation. Pupil premium is at 39%. So for many children, their only experience of the outdoors is at school. To make the grounds dark and unwelcoming will not be a positive experience to contribute to their well-being. They're also very dependent on using Russia Dock Woodland and Stave Hill Ecology Park. They're very valued and important local resources and for the schools. The school frequents the woodlands regularly, and as all the bridges are named after the schools have great ownership of the woodlands, and this is not to be overlooked. If you make the woodlands dark, and as Rebecca was saying, the children will no longer enjoy going there. Talked about outdoor spaces, sorry. Okay, and also you talk about the family homes in K1. It's our contention that K1 is the playground within the horseshoe of K1 is likely to be shaded, and as you all know, Southwark has a very serious issue with child obesity and well-being, so hence it's very important that the grounds of Alfred Salter and Russia Dock Woodland are enjoyable places for children. The other thing is about, and that comes under transport in a way, Quiet Way 14, which goes up the side of the school into Russia Dock Woodland. The number of people, the number of occupants of K1 in its present form would severely impact on that, because all the school children go along that route. Right. And the other thing about K1 is Roberts Close is a dead end. It has absolutely no turning circle, and the proposals are that vehicles visiting K1, which occupies the footprint of the site, would turn in the school's emergency exit, and this is not acceptable. That's on page 122. Okay, and the other thing about, which I think is slightly misleading in the report on page 175, is that Canada's para 823 is that Canada Street, namely Wolf Crescent, properties overlook the school car park. Archangel Street and St Elmo's Road overlook the school staff room and kitchen. Timber Pond Road is not really applicable, and King's permission of 13 AP 1429 was referred to. That has no balconies along Quebec Way, and the school had extensive discussions when that scheme was being considered. It's about restrictions to delivery times near the school nursery and the reception because of the extended teaching spaces, and the balconies were to have frosted glass and angled windows and so on and so forth. So I think you need to take the whole picture of where Alfred Salter is located. Okay.
Before your colleague, Chair, with your permission, before your colleague comes in and tells us a little bit about St John's School from sort of her perspective and the school's perspective, outlined in the report, some of the issues that you've raised have been addressed, and one of the mitigating solutions for that is to provide the school with additional money. How do you propose the school would, given your experience as a governor, a former governor of the school, how do you propose they would actually use that to sort of resolve some of these issues?
Oh, sorry. Alfred Salter School is a two-form entry school with 30 children per class, so 660 per year group. It is also a resource centre for many special needs children, so it has numerous children in wheelchairs and all sorts of special equipment. So the corridor sizes are very important to any modification that is done to the design, because if you put more children in that school, there would be tremendous, the dynamics of the circulation of the children would not work because of all the wheelchairs and special equipment. Secondly, you have to, if you extend a school, you have to think about the staff room, the dining room, the halls, etc., etc. It's a very, very complicated process to extend a school. So, does that sort of answer your question? Pardon? And how we would spend the money? That would be for the school to answer. I'm talking about the bill. I mean, I can come back with an answer, but on Monday.
So did you want me to start with your question about overlooking first, or the thing with the money now? The overlooking. Okay. So thank you. So you might remember from your visit that St John's School sits a little bit differently from Alfred Salter School. So we don't immediately abut the K1 site. Where the K1 site is, it's on the corner of Roberts Close, which is Alfred Salter's opposite, and then on the other side, on the other corner, is Russia Walk leading into Rushdock Woodland. Across from Russia Walk is the site of the Catholic Church and the Catholic Primary School, and we're sort of one site nominally split into two, so we are facing another side of K1. The way that we fear that overlooking will influence or affect St John's is that if you stand at St John's, because we're that little bit further away from Quebec Way development and Claremont House development, if you stand anywhere in St John's and you look around, all the children see is greenery and low-rise housing, so ground and first floor housing, and that the design of the school is all on one level, and that very open aspect permeates through the playground where you've got these open views into the surrounding landscape. Our concern is that the 6-storey K1 proposal, which goes right up until the edge of Russia Walk, will not only, because it's sort of in the southerly facing direction from the school, will provide quite a lot of shadow, particularly in the winter months, but will also, the way the windows are designed, or the flats are designed, they will have windows overlooking not only the church and the church grounds, but into the outdoor classroom of the early years in particular. And in our early years, the children spend their day in free flow between indoor and outdoor, and the sort of opportunities and the setup is mirrored indoors and outdoors. So for the children, it's all one and the same, and that's part of the ethos of the school, that because we also have a 38-39% pupil premium, a lot of children in poverty who don't get pupil premium, we want the school to be an outdoor play space, outdoor learning space for those children who often don't have any outdoor space that they can access in their own homes. And that sort of leads us to part of the second concern we have with the way of the design of the K1 site, that if that's social housing and some of the units there are larger, so could accommodate families with children, it goes a little bit to what you were saying before. I don't remember your name, but the second lady in, you were asking somebody a similar question. so our experience with our pupil premium children is that we can do huge work, and the school is very successful at using the pupil premium to get the attainment and the progress for those children up to national levels and beyond. But what we can't mitigate against is what's then going on outside the school. So a lot of those children, when they get to secondary and we can try and track them through, they're not making the progress that we would hope, and they're not leading these independent lives. And there's a lot of research into that, but that doesn't always carry through. And a lot of that is because of the environments that they're living in. You know, poor housing, poor access to outdoor space, poor play facilities. And what we're concerned about is the way that this building has been designed. There'll be a shade into the central garden courtyard area that would affect any children wanting to play there. It would be quite noisy space potentially because of lecker inside it, and it's a very sort of brusque building in a very confined plot of land. So we don't feel that that's going to really help any children living there, you know, out with their school hours, if you like, in their home hours, living in a good environment that contributes to their health and well-being and their ability to, you know, progress in their education and their future adult lives. And I guess because of our experience of the children we work with, the vulnerable children that we have in our care, you know, we want any social housing to be an asset and somewhere that those children can grow up from that social housing and become adults functioning well in our society.
Thank you for that answer. Can I ask you to please turn off your mic for a moment? Thank you. Councillor Newlands, a quick question? Yes. This is on this theme, of course.
Yep. I'm aware that Alfred Salter, from the site visit, I'm aware that the Alfred Salter School is very close, obviously, to K1. Can you outline, because obviously I'm thinking of the concerns that you've raised about the visual aspect from the school which you're a governor. Could you give some idea of the distance between the K1 building and its St John's School, please?
I haven't measured it, but I can come back with that on Monday. But I don't know if any of my colleagues.
I wondered if it might be something that officers are able to advise.
Yes, we can all go measure it.
I suppose I'm asking because I kind of had the impression that I was expecting it was quite a distance. But
so the end of the nursery outdoor learning space is the bit that is closest of the children's space to the K1 site, and it's a cross bit of grass that belongs to the church. So I would say in the ballpark 20. No, less than that. I would say it's less than that. Probably, I don't know, 30 metres or something. But I can go and measure that. And we can come back with that figure on Monday. And I guess the council officers will want to do the same.
The visualisation is in Environmental Statement, Volume 3, Part 1. Have you found it?
We found it, that's fine. Can you turn off your mic, please? Can you turn off your mic? Again, I want to thank you for your contribution. That was very insightful. Thank you very much indeed. I want to move on to, in fact, I want to revert to the earlier theme on transport. I think we should complete that, and I just want to make sure we've captured all the key pointers, and I'm conscious that we've got a representative here from TfL as well, and I just want to make sure I've understood both from the point of view of the representative from Canary Wharf and indeed your contribution, Brian, in relation to transport and transport-related issues. I just want to pick up maybe one or 2 points, if I may. So the first question really centres on interchange at the various stations. So you've got we've got Canada Water, Rotherhithe. We've got a bus station immediately above. It seems to be, at first glance, that seems quite ample. But can I just ask you just to recite again where you feel the capacity problems are, and then we'll get on to maybe our representative from TfL, just so we've got some understanding of the relationship between what you're stating and what TfL will assert the steps they will take to mitigate the impact. Go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. The two issues are
in relation to Canada Water and the local residents is there is I don't know what the numbers are, but a very, very large proportion of people coming from the overground down to the Jubilee line to either go east or west. And if you're there in the peak periods in the morning, there is no space on any trains going east or west. And that has an effect of shutting down the station so that local residents can't get in. The booking hall gets crowded, and people get locked out, and that is what happens on a fairly regular basis. I mean, certainly people get held at the gate line on almost every day, but the station actually gets closed. So that's the key issue. It's the interchange between the overground and the Jubilee line. And you add more trains on the overground, you increase that point. Coming up from, say, the south and coming into Canada Water, you couldn't get a seat. But going out from Canada Water to go up to Highbury and Islington, you can get a seat every day. So that's an essence of that problem.
Yeah, in fact, there was a memo TfL wrote in July last year in response to the master plan, which raised a number of very serious concerns. One of the things they said was that in the transport studies there was a lack of acknowledgement of the growth that's occurred between 2011 and 2017, and all of the reported outputs rely on raw model data with no adjustment to the observed. One example of this in para 5.3.8 is that it states there are no capacity issues on the Jubilee line westbound when the results of the station survey show that there are regularly left behind, i.e. people that can't get onto a train when the train leaves in the peak. And it went on to say London Overground services are already running severely crowded during the peak hour based on current loading data, never mind in 2031, and the data does show unacceptable high levels of crowding on the East London line northbound Surrey Quays. There is a proposed mitigation in the plans, which is the 4 extra trains. The increase in frequency on the East London line. But as I said, if you're talking about a centre of employment on this site of up to 30,000 people, and let's take the medium of that, the 20,000 as discussed before, a lot of these people are going to be travelling into the site via the mainline railway stations at Waterloo and London Bridge and coming in on the Jubilee line. Even if only half of them do, that's 10,000 extra people coming in. There isn't the capacity for that now, let alone when the site's finished. So, it is going to have a detrimental impact on the current users of the line.
I think the points are well heard. And can I invite our representative from TfL just to make some comments on what's been described so far, because they appear to reflect my own personal experience. I've been at each of those stations at peak times, and it is quite an experience, to say the least. And I've travelled across to Canary Wharf, and that was indeed an experience. And that's as it is now. And if I understood the report and what's this presentation, and indeed what's been presented by our representative from Canary Wharf, that any mitigation that is implemented is only temporary, then we return to the conditions which we have today. That seems quite, well, devastating. But over to you.
Well, firstly,
First of all, welcome. First of all, introduce yourself. Sorry.
Yes, my name is Anne Crane. I'm the area manager for East London, which does actually include Southwark, and that's dealing with a team of people who look at planning applications, the major ones. I have been working on this project for the past 2 to 3 years, since British Land first came to TfL to put forward proposals, and prior to that on the Canada Water Action Area Plan and so forth. So I've had quite a lot of knowledge of this site. We got the Canary Wharf Group 50-odd page objection late last week. We have been assessing it and have provided initial comments to Southwark officers, some of which are reflected in the addendum, obviously not all of them, because would have overbalanced that addendum. We have also asked our own consultant, Smart McDonald, to undertake further review of the modelling work to bring things up to date, and also to respond to the Canary Wharf Group's comments that were made last week. That work is underway and will be available in time for you to consider ahead of Monday's meeting, but not today. In terms of the transport mitigation that's being put forward, our view is that it meets the requirements to mitigate the development appropriately in respect of Regulation 122. That's the tests of viability. Yes, there are issues, I would agree, about capacity. I'm afraid one of those people who interchanges at Canada Water from the overground onto the Jubilee line to get to Stratford to work. I do know and I do understand what the issues are at peak times. Yes, the Elizabeth line will help, so people like me may well stay on the overground and carry on to Whitechapel to get to work in that way. There are also issues, I would agree, coming in from central London to go to Canada Water, Canary Wharf and Stratford. It's another route I do quite often. One of the points to bear in mind with residents who have problems accessing the trains at Canada Water is that, as has been noted, there will be a lot of jobs within the British Land Development, and that will create churn on the trains. In other words, people will be getting out of those trains and freeing up space for those people who are wishing to get on the trains to go to other places to work, be it east or west. British Land and ourselves, along with Southwark, have spent quite a lot of time looking at the station, talking to station staff who really understand how that station operates. A number of them have been there for many, many years. They know the issues. And so we've come up with a package of works to relieve congestion in places, take out things that mean people can't move around properly or are slowed down. We've also negotiated with British Land a package of staffing measures to manage the station effectively with the extra people who will be using it, and to make the most of actually these people who will be getting off trains as well as people wanting to get on the trains. So in summary, our view is that there is adequate transport mitigation. Obviously, we will be providing more detail on Monday of that assessment.
If I may, thank you. This is your mic. This is your mic. Yeah.
Which one is it?
There you go. I'm going to acknowledge that in your professional assessment, the Regulation 122, this scheme is compliant. Does that mean that it's compliant as of today, or 5 years' time, 10 years' time, and at some point it may no longer be compliant, as is the current trajectory? I just want to understand what you mean by compliant. Is it current, contemporary, or is it a future compliance, or is it anticipating a long-term compliance situation?
We've assessed it up until the full amount, and we've looked at it both in terms of the maximum jobs element, the maximum homes element, and something in between. Obviously, it's going to take 15 years to build out, something like that, and we'll be looking at it all the way along, as will be the case with highways and a number of the other things, because this is predominantly an outline application. But our assessment was that there was the adequate mitigation for the full amount applied for.
Forgive me. I know colleagues want to come in, and I'm just conscious of time, and I want to make sure we pin down this one because it's going to be a recurring theme. And if I may, just pursue on this. So the current infrastructure, I think we both would agree, is not compliant.
Yeah.
Please, people, don't do this. would we agree the current infrastructure is not compliant and is not meeting the local needs at this time? Would that be right?
I think the difficulty is that most of London's infrastructure has similar, if not greater, crowding than the Canada Water. Canada Water, there will be additional capacity delivered on the overground, the extra 4 trains per hour, the new station entrance at Surrey Quays. There is also government funding committed to improve the frequency of trains on the DLR. Now, you may say the DLR is some distance away, but it does actually provide some relief to the Jubilee line. The Elizabeth line, when it starts operating, which will be before first occupation of this development, will provide relief. Yes, obviously, with growth all the way along the line, across London, that capacity will be gradually used up. And TfL is working to look at how we can address those capacity issues.
My last question will then come over to my colleagues, and it's important that we pursue this, just to make sure we've understood. So, if being a politician, I listened carefully to words used, so I'm assuming, based on what you've described, that is not currently compliant with Regulation 122, and that's fine, it's okay, that's okay. If you're not saying that, you're not saying that, okay. All right, okay. The reason why I'm asking the question is because the baseline is clearly below the demand is clearly higher than the current capacity. Okay, so that's pretty evident if you go around the area at peak times. Okay, and that clearly cannot meet your current performance expectations anyway. Our colleague from Canary Wharf can talk about your quite specific policies. So by any measure, that cannot be so. So what I'm trying to understand is how much is required to bring it up to acceptable standard as of today, notwithstanding other parts of London. We're concerned about this application and this area. Okay, so my question is, are the applicants paying sufficient? It's been alluded to that they may not be contributing sufficient to the transport infrastructure to mitigate their development's impact on your infrastructure. And then secondly, if that is the case, how much, and do you concur with our colleague from Canary Wharf that they should be paying at least 200 million plus?
Well, I think anybody would say we would like lots of money, but we've got to be realistic, and we've got to meet government tests as to what is reasonable to expect a developer to do in the way of mitigating their impact, bearing in mind what else they are doing in the way of impact mitigation, the viability of the scheme, delivery of affordable housing. And we've also got to bear in mind that compared with a number of other schemes, that British Land will be paying a significant amount of MSIL 2 and also Borough SIL. And so therefore it's looking at the overall package and viewing the viability. The Jubilee line and the Canada Water Station, yes, there are capacity issues, but there are capacity issues throughout London. This is not by any means the worst. Obviously, it's not the best. And there are things happening here that are committed or being worked towards that will relieve those overcrowding issues.
Thank you. I will accept that response. Thank you. I'm going to go to Councillor Whittam first. Who else wants to speak first of all? Councillor Vine, go ahead. Councillor Whittam.
Can you tell us if you have plans to go to 32 trains an hour or 34 or 36?
32 trains per hour is something that we are actually working on. We're expecting to get there by about the end of 2021, and that is committed in the sense that there is the funding available. We need to work out how best to deliver it. In terms of 34 trains per hour, we have identified opportunities to be able to deliver that frequency. we'll need to work out how we can fund it. But we can see how we can do it.
Thank you for your response. Councillor O'Brien, please.
Thank you for your answer. I think a couple of things. First of all, 2 entrances onto Surrey Quays station doesn't make the platform any bigger. It just means there's more people piling into it. But that's not my question. My question was, you said that people will be leaving Canada Water, to go and work on this project, freeing up space for other people to come on. That means a load of people have been left on the platform earlier on, because at the moment the train's still full. So they still, the train is still full. They're trying to get to work. They've now got more people on the train who will be getting off to work on the British Land project, which frees up space. But what you've done is left people on the platform further down the line, surely.
Well, not necessarily, because not every person is going to be a new person working in London. So some people could be going to, say, Canary Wharf at the moment, or Stratford, and instead get out at Canada Water. But then I think the other point to bear in mind is that you have got the people coming into mainline stations, which I'm presuming is what you're referring to, have a lot of travel options. I've got 3-4 different ways of getting to Stratford, and it varies depending on what I'm doing, what time of the day it is, and so therefore the opportunities, for example, presented by the Elizabeth line means that people coming in at some of the mainline stations are more likely to get onto that line to go to, say, Canary Wharf than they would be the Jubilee line. It's quicker. I mean, people do behave in, that a lot of people do tend to, if you're a regular traveller, you work out how the best way is to travel, depending on time.
Okay, and there was a question I asked earlier which was completely avoided, and that's the Silvertown Tunnel and the Blackwall Tunnel being tolled and the Rotherhithe Tunnel being the first free crossing. Has the increased amount of traffic, road traffic, trying to get through the Rotherhithe Tunnel been factored into your calculations?
This was covered in the highway modelling work, and yes, it would have been factored in as part of the consideration.
And the answer to that was?
There isn't a significant impact, but this is about through traffic. It's about traffic not related to this development.
Well, it is, because it's adding to. I mean, we know how bad it is to try and get through the Rotherhithe Tunnel the best of times.
Of course, it is worth bearing in mind that the Rotherhithe Tunnel is only capable of handling small vehicles nowadays. But there was a lot of assessment work done for the Silvertown Tunnel, and including taking account of the grave concerns that Southwark and Lewisham had about traffic instead diverting to the Rotherhithe Tunnel, being the first, as you say, free crossing. And the outcome of that study was that there wasn't that significant impact. I can obviously provide further detail for you on Monday.
That would be great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Whittam.
Talking about buses as well, the P-TAL for going around the Rotherhithe Peninsula and Salter Road is 2 at a maximum, between 1 and 2. And we really do need, or we will need, an extra bus route. I suggest either the 199 or the 188 be diverted around the peninsula rather than going straight to Canada Water, because the 381 and the C10 will increasingly get full up before they get to the tip of the peninsula.
My colleagues in the bus services planning have been looking at capacity issues, routings to best serve Canada Water development, and how best to use the bus service money that has been negotiated that will be included in Section 106. And it's a matter really of looking, yes, as you say, about capacity issues, accessibility issues, to make the most of money that's available, both from the developer and also from TfL in terms of subsidy of bus services, and what those demands are. And also looking at it in the context of opportunities for walking and cycling, and using the overground system, say, to go from Rotherhithe to Canada Water. So it's a complete package, and our feeling is that what we're looking to do with the British Land money is going to meet the needs of people. And the talk is of a service connecting with the Old Kent Road and going to central London that way, and also one roughly powering the Jubilee line that will come from Deptford and Lewisham. Now, I know that doesn't do the peninsula, but what it is doing is taking people off the buses you're talking about who would otherwise be on them. So, the bus service planning is something we keep under constant review, and if there is a demand there, we'll be looking to meet it, because obviously our duty is to provide bus services for people who need those. And I do appreciate also that bus services are something that's important to many people who can't use the tube or the overground for whatever reason, or who want to do shorter journeys for which the overground or the underground is not a feasible option.
All righty. As you can see, this will be a recurring theme, and I'm grateful for your responses. And I hope from the point of view of the objectors, we've begun to get under the skin of the transport issues. You want to say something? Go ahead. Yes.
Say a couple of things. And I have a huge sympathy for Anne, because I know she's working very hard to try and mitigate some of these issues. But for the problem is TfL have run out of money. The scheme here, as she said, it's all about forcing people onto other lines, because there isn't going to be the capacity to cope with the number of people here. So it's all about pushing onto other lines. The problem is, and you know, it's not in front of you, but if you look at the Mayor's transport strategy for 2041, the two worst lines are the Jubilee line between Waterloo and Canary Wharf through this site, and the other one is the Northern line. And part of the problem is, you know, coming into Waterloo and London Bridge, you haven't got an Elizabeth line option. If you want to get to the Elizabeth line or to DLR, you're going on the Northern line, which is the other line that's overcrowded. So it's the other worst line on the network. So the two worst lines are the one that's effectively the key ones here. You mentioned people will come in and get off at this station, freeing up capacity, but there's also obviously going to be a significant new residential population here getting on. So that really is going to fill up, you know, the one is going to balance out the other. And you also talked about the contributions through MSIL in your written response. I would point out that the mayoral SIL, which goes towards transport, unfortunately for the next 10 years at least, is going to be all spent on meeting the shortfall in the Crossrail 1 expenditure. So there'll be no additional money from MSIL for any new transport. But in specific terms here, am I right in thinking the mayoral SIL for this site would be £60 per square metre, which is the London normal rate. At Canary Wharf, it's £185 a square metre. So for our transport contribution, our schemes, we're paying 3 times as much as this scheme is, despite the fact this is the next stop on the line. And finally, you said we got no money, and money would be nice. But there you go. If you're not asking British Land for a contribution, if you're not asking people on the peninsula and the Greenwich Peninsula for a contribution at Canning Town, Madison Square Garden development at Stratford, you're not asking the developers on the Isle of Dogs for contribution towards the specific impact that these schemes have on the existing transport, then you'll never have the money to do it. Future scheme.
Excuse me, hold on a moment.
We've paid many times.
Your contribution is noted. I'm not going to ask for immediate response. If I may, I've got 2 more speakers for this theme. Then I'm going to move on to Councillor Adele Morris and then Councillor Soames.
Yeah, actually, Councillor O'Brien has looked over my shoulder and asked one of my questions. I've got it written down here. I can't read.
Don't worry, folks. It's 10 o'clock at night. There you are.
But you know, I suppose it's not really a question, because lots of people have asked similar questions to ones I was going to ask, and I think I'd just like to make a comment that I'm not reassured by anything that I've heard is my comment.
Councillor, that is not what I want you to say at this stage.
Yeah, well, no, but in terms of, I wanted to ask particularly in terms of buses, because obviously lots of bus routes have been reduced in London, you know, and bus passenger numbers supposedly have dropped. So, you know, how come we're factoring buses in as being an important component to relieve the pressure on the tubes, because if people aren't actually using them?
I think the where buses have been reduced is where there isn't the demand in relation to the number of services being provided. Where there is demand, the buses have been retained, and we've been negotiating with developers for contributions. Now, developers, British Land or others, are not going to willingly pay for bus services to replace ones we've taken away, or that they can see are going to be running around empty. And so therefore, we are seeking bus service money in order to meet demands we're expecting to see. If those demands do not arise, then we will not be getting the bus service money. And you know, our assessment is that the routes we've been talking to British Land about, for which there will be, you know, a Section 106 secured, are routes that people want to use. They're connecting places together that either don't have rail services, or are doing shorter journeys, or meeting the needs of people who do not want to use the overground or the underground.
Thank you.
A connection, say, to the Old Kent Road.
Thank you. I'm not going to take further questions other than this Councillor Soames, and I am going to move on. There will be an opportunity on the 30th. Go ahead.
I'll be as quick as I can, Chair. Thank you very much. I echo Councillor Morris's, but I was particularly interested in the report that you said that was missing, and I did ask you specifically the question about what particular components of that report would be relevant for us for consideration, and you. In response, a few minutes ago, you mentioned the Northern Line and Jubilee Line. I was particularly perplexed by your response, Ms Crane, in terms of your justification for accepting the current TfL's model regarding this application. And you referred to a number of congestion sites or hubs intermittently located around London in established areas, but we're talking about a new town centre here, and we currently know what the capacity is, and it's under capacity in terms of being able to address the demands of the current population. So I'm somewhat confused. So
and a question, Councillor. Sorry.
Yeah. So how do you justify that? I believe you can't justify and make comparisons.
The question.
Yes, that's the question.
Thank you.
Our assessment would indicate that the transport system is capable of accommodating the demand from this development with the mitigation British Land is putting forward and the other things that are we're either committed to doing or looking to do over the period of the development. And you know, it is worthwhile remembering that this development will take 15 years to build out. There will be a lot of changes over that period, and also quite a lot of opportunities for adjustments, because most of it is an outline application. For your meeting on Monday, there will be the further work our modellers are doing, not British Land's modellers are doing, hopefully to reassure you that the mitigation is sufficient and that local people will get the sort of service that people who use transport in London expect and see as normal. But London is a congested place. We've already got that problem at Canada Water. So the question is, is this development going to make it significantly worse, taking account what is being proposed in the way of mitigation and what is also proposed in the way of committed schemes or schemes in the pipeline that will improve transport capacity? Yeah.
Sorry, but just conferring. I'm just conscious of time. One of the principles of me being chair is that we would not go beyond 10 o'clock. No longer do we do these early morning meetings, which are quite antisocial in my view. So what I'm proposing to do is to adjourn this part of the meeting, and we will reconvene on the 30th. We will continue with the objectors' question and answer session for no more than 30 minutes of that meeting, because there are still outstanding questions which we need to put to yourselves. I hope that's acceptable.
Yes.
Fair enough. In that case, then, the time is now 7 minutes past 10. The meeting is now closed, adjourned. Thank you.